It was Nathan's idea, of course. It always was. One last trip before classes started, he'd said, smiling like the forest was calling out just to him. I didn't have the nerve or the strength to tell him no. That's how we ended up on Black Hollow Trail. 2 backpacks stuffed with gear, and me trudging behind like I already knew something was wrong. The day was beautiful. Not a single cloud in the sky, warm sunshine everywhere. The kind of afternoon that makes it hard to believe anything bad could happen. But the closer we got to the trail entrance, the more the world around us fell quiet. Even the cicadas, which had been screeching earlier, seemed to vanish into silence the moment we stepped beneath the trees. "Come on, Tyler, keep moving," Nathan called, already a few steps ahead. His pack bounced with every stride, his energy practically buzzing. I adjusted the straps on my own bag, silently regretting how much I brought, and followed. The trail started out wide and flat, a mild uphill walk over loose stone and roots. But soon it narrowed, squeezed in by trees packed so tightly their limbs nodded overhead. Sunlight came through in broken rays, spilling long, jagged shadows on the dirt. I kept my eyes locked on Nathan's back, trying not to notice how the air turned cool, how the breeze carried a bitter smell, like moldy leaves. "Why's it smell like that?" I asked, louder than I meant to in the dead quiet. Nathan just shrugged. "Animals, maybe. Don't worry about it. It's just a trail." But it wasn't. Not really. I'd never seen Black Hollow on any regular map. The rumors were always fuzzy. Bits and pieces told by kids at school who swore they'd seen strange shapes or heard voices in the dark. I hadn't believed them, not until now. As we climbed higher, I started spotting strange marks on the trunks. At first, I figured they were scratches from a bear or maybe some other animal, but the closer I looked, the less they made sense. Thin, crooked lines that curved and twisted, like someone had scraped them into the bark on purpose. "You seeing this?" I asked, stopping to run a finger along one of them. Nathan didn't even glance back. Probably just some bored hiker messing around. "Let's go. We'll lose daylight if we don't keep up." Every part of me wanted to turn around. My whole body screamed that we should go back. But Nathan's confidence was like a drug. He always dove headfirst into stuff like this, and I always followed, too stubborn to be the one who backed out. By the time we reached Maple Hollow, a wide stretch surrounded by rough cliff walls that seemed to lean inward, the sun had dipped low, painting the sky with smears of orange and purple. Nathan dropped his bag and stretched, grinning. "This is perfect," he said. "Check out that view." I slid off my pack and collapsed onto a flat rock. The air felt too still, like something was holding its breath. I tried to focus on the cliffs, on how the sunlight hit them just right. But the feeling that someone or something was watching us wouldn't go away. Nathan, of course, didn't notice. He grabbed his flashlight and tossed his pack over one shoulder. "I'm gonna check out that ridge. Be back in 10. "Wait, what?" I stood, already reaching for my own flashlight. "You're just gonna take off? It's getting dark." He laughed, that relaxed, overconfident laugh that always made me feel like a kid. "Chill out, Tyler. I'll be fine. Get the fire going. I won't be long." I watched him disappear through the trees, his flashlight beam bouncing between the trunks. For a second, I thought about following him. But the idea of being alone in the woods, in the dark, felt even worse than staying put. Starting the fire was harder than I thought. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and the dry sticks Nathan had packed didn't want to catch. By the time I got a little flame going, the sun was gone, leaving only flickers of firelight and the pitch-black forest beyond. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The fire crackled, throwing dancing shapes onto the trees that made them look like they were breathing. I looked at my watch. My stomach felt like it was twisting in knots. "Nathan," I called, my voice swallowed up by the stillness. Nothing. The shadows stretched further now, darker, with edges that looked wrong somehow. I stood and turned toward the path he had taken, flashlight shaking in my grip. The woods beyond the fire felt alive, like they were watching. "Nathan!" I yelled again, louder this time. Somewhere in the trees, a faint sound, like a twig snapping. Relief washed through me. "Finally," I muttered. stepping toward the noise. But there was no reply. The firelight felt far behind me as I stared into the woods. My flashlight blinked once, the beam weak and flickering. I thought I saw something, a figure slipping between the trees, but when I focused, it was gone. Something wasn't right. I felt it deep in my chest. The hair on my arms stood up. The shadows weren't just moving, they were watching. I stepped backward, flashlight trembling, and then I heard it. A whisper, barely a breath. "Tyler!" It came from somewhere ahead, soft and stretched out like someone dragging my name slowly through their teeth. My heart thumped in my chest. "Nathan!" I whispered, but deep down I knew it wasn't him. I don't know how long I stood there staring into the trees. The fire still flickered behind me, but it felt like it was a mile away. My grip on the flashlight was so tight my hand ached, but I couldn't let go. The whisper came again, slow and broken. "Tyler!" I turned, light sweeping the trail. That's when I saw it. Nathan's pack, sitting upright in the middle of the path, like someone had placed it there. One strap was ripped, barely hanging on. There was dirt all over it. I crouched, hand shaking as I reached out. "Nathan!" I whispered, hoping somehow he'd jump out and laugh, like it was some joke. But the woods stayed quiet. I opened the pack slowly. The zipper sounded loud in the stillness. Inside, a flashlight, a full water bottle, his old compass, and a folded-up map. Everything untouched. My stomach flipped. He wouldn't have left this behind unless something forced him to. "Where are you?" I muttered, voice breaking. Then it came again. The whisper, louder now. "Tyler!" It was closer, deeper, like the forest was saying my name. My flashlight snapped upward, and I caught the faintest flicker of something. A shape too big to be Nathan, sliding between trees. "Who's there?" I shouted, voice cracking. No answer, just a sound, almost like laughter, dry and brittle, like leaves crunching underfoot. My chest tightened with panic. I stumbled back, flashlight shaking wildly. The shadows were crawling now, moving in ways that didn't make sense. Then I saw the footprints. They led away from the pack, deeper into the trees. At first, I thought they were Nathan's, but as I followed the beam across them, my stomach dropped. They were wrong. Too long, too wide, the spacing too far apart, like whatever made them didn't walk like a person. "Nathan?" I whispered again, barely able to breathe. I didn't want to follow the prints. Every part of me screamed to run back to the fire, wait for sunrise. But if Nathan was out there, if he needed me, I swallowed hard and stepped forward. The woods grew darker. Trees stood closer. The air got heavy, thick, like breathing through wet cloth. My flashlight flickered again. The beam felt dimmer, like the forest was draining it. Then the track stopped. I found myself in a small clearing. At its center, a huge, twisted tree towered, its trunk covered in deep, swirling carvings that gave off a faint glow. The patterns made my skin crawl. They felt alive. The dirt at the base was churned up, like something had been dug or buried. That awful smell was stronger now, sour and stinging. "Nathan!" I called, barely louder than a breath. No reply, but the shadows around the tree shifted, pulling inward. I stepped closer. Each movement felt like dragging bricks. Near the roots, my flashlight caught a torn piece of fabric, dirty, stuck in the bark. Nathan's shirt. My breath caught. Then, the whisper again, clear and sharp. "Tyler!" I spun around, flashlight beam swinging. Nothing. But the voices didn't stop. They grew, more of them, whispering from everywhere and nowhere. "Tyler! Tyler! Tyler!" They weren't just calling. They were laughing. I backed away, heart thudding, tripped over a root. The flashlight flew from my hand, hit the ground, and started to flicker. I scrambled for it. My fingers brushed cold dirt, and I saw it. A figure, tall, impossibly thin, stepped from behind the tree. His face wasn't a face, just a black hole that swallowed light. Its arms were too long, joints bending wrong, like a puppet with no strings. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The thing tilted its head, like it was studying me, then took a step, My body kicked in. I grabbed My wife and I moved into our camper van back in late September. Our first stop was visiting family in southern New Mexico. Then we planned to head to Arizona for a music festival. After the festival wrapped up, we decided to stick around Tucson for a while to check out a local gym and the Mineral Expo before making our way north toward Flagstaff and then on to the Grand Canyon. On our way to the Grand Canyon, we discovered a great boondocking spot in Prescott National Forest. It was on a narrow Forest Service road that only had 2 parking spots. One spot was taken by a man and his little boy, who I guessed were spending the day in Sedona, about 40 minutes away, planning to rest early in their RV. We took the last spot before the fork in the road, which was amazing. The spot was set on a small hill that had been flattened at the top. From there, you could see all the mountain ranges around you, with a wooden fence from a nearby ranch just beside us. The ranch was beyond the next ridge, and the valley below was dotted with wild cattle. The scenery was breathtaking. I spent most of my time just gazing out at it. The area was super remote too, which we loved because we enjoy stargazing and privacy. We usually went to bed early around sunset, waking up at sunrise with just one bathroom break in the middle of the night. One night, when we got up for that bathroom trip, we stepped outside and were stunned by how clear and bright the stars were. They looked incredible. We went back to bed and agreed to stay an extra night just so we could watch the stars again, hoping they'd be even better. The next day, we listened to music, counted shooting stars, and soaked in the landscape. I kept staring at one particular ridge, telling my wife that a bright light was flashing on it, almost like a strobe. She looked but didn't see anything. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then I saw the light a few more times and started to get worried. As a wilderness first responder, I wondered if maybe there was a hiker stranded up there trying to get help. But the spots where the light appeared changed too quickly for anyone to be moving on foot or bike. Later that evening, after making dinner, we sat outside watching the sunset. Then we went back inside the van to hang out until it got dark enough to see the stars and the Milky Way clearly. Around 10 or 11 p.m., we went outside again, and I immediately looked up. There was a light so bright and white, it seemed very close. I asked if it could be the North Star, but how could it be so bright and near? My wife said she wasn't sure. We kept walking around the van, watching the sky and spotting satellites. When we returned to our original spot and looked up, the light was gone. But then it appeared again. This time it was moving farther away and changed colors. It flickered quickly, shifting between yellow, red, and blue, jumping around almost like a hummingbird. I've seen a lot of strange things in my life, so I wasn't too shocked or worried. We had recently seen the Marfa lights in Texas, which looked similar but moved more fluidly. Then everything changed in moments. The light shifted into deep purples and violet blues, with splashes of magenta. It looked calm and peaceful, almost soothing. The light moved closer to us, shifting colors more often: blues, violets, pinks, and greens. It came down to the ground level on the other side of a large juniper tree. It caught my breath. The juniper was just a short distance away. We noticed the light was literally peeking out from behind the tree, like we had been peeking at it from behind the van. It moved in a way I can only describe as curious, like a child. The light seemed to be where a face might be, roughly the height of an average man. Suddenly, I realized how close we were to it and felt scared. It was like a huge secret about to be revealed. One you're not sure you want to see because once you do, there's no going back. The box would be open. I might have made a noise or jumped back when the fear hit me. The light thing didn't like that at all. It dropped very low to the ground and started looking through the bushes, right near the juniper. Then it began pulsing a red light, the color of anger. I was terrified. We ran back to the van, jumped in, and locked the doors. Our van windows have bubble wrap insulation inside during the colder months to keep heat in, so we couldn't see out clearly. At that moment, I didn't want to see anything. I was horrified and couldn't catch my breath. After calming down, we felt we had to check where the light had been. We stepped outside and found the area empty. That was a relief, but also made me wonder if I had imagined everything. Then I looked to my left, just beyond the fence at the ranch. I saw several similar lights moving back and forth in greens and blues. They were far away, so I wasn't too scared and actually felt calmer. For some reason, I turned back toward the ridge I'd been watching that morning. I thought I saw something big moving in the dark. I told myself I was just imagining things. Then a bright light suddenly appeared. Not a light, but a creature of some kind. It looked like something from sci-fi movies, robotic, maybe like a machine. This thing was big and clearly visible. It shone a bright beam into the valley where we had seen the blue and green lights earlier. It flashed a few times, then vanished. All the other lights disappeared shortly after that and didn't come back for the rest of the night. I wish we had thought to grab our phones, but everything happened so fast that it didn't cross our minds to record it. Even so, some photos I took during the trip looked strange in ways I can't explain. I've been trekking in the Ouachita Mountains for many years now. I'm a 36-year-old guy who's kind of obsessed with staying fit and healthy. It all began as a confidence issue I had back in high school. I was pretty overweight as a teenager. Feeling motivated and living near nature, I started hiking and camping with my uncle. Within about a year, I dropped the extra weight I wanted to lose, but after that, I couldn't stop spending most of my free time outside. Nothing else comes close. Hiking gives me a kind of rush. About a month after I turned 26, my uncle died from cancer. I think that's when this hobby I loved so much turned into a full lifestyle. Hiking was the one thing that had brought us close, so after he was gone, it became even more important to me. But I'm not here to tell you a sad story or write my whole life story. I want to tell you there's something really off about the deer in the Ouachitas. As of October 2022, the Ouachitas are popular hunting grounds, so the deer here get spooked really easily. They usually bolt before you even get close or smell them. But lately, I've been accidentally coming across them in ways that felt wrong. This all started during a solo camping trip I took on October 10th. That morning, I packed up my camp early and headed back onto the trail. Not even 20 minutes later, I almost freaked out when I looked up and saw a huge buck standing right on the path where there had been an open trail moments before. The buck was grunting and pawing at the dirt. At first, I thought maybe it hadn't noticed me yet, so I tried to scare it off by shouting. Strangely, the buck just froze. It didn't move or even look my way. I shouted louder, but it still didn't respond. The buck was huge, with an impressive rack of antlers, but my curiosity got the better of me. I reached out and touched it, which I know was dumb, but the buck didn't flinch at all when I pressed my hand against its side, right under the ribs near the belly. At first, I was kind of amazed. How often do you get to touch a wild deer that close? But then my excitement died fast. I felt something moving beneath the deer's skin. It felt like worms or snakes writhing around. It was disgusting. I thought maybe the deer had parasites, but I've never heard of worms that big living inside an animal like that. Maybe its organs were shifting? That didn't make sense either. The only thing that seemed to fit was that its intestines were moving somehow, but how and why? Then it hit me. Maybe this was some strange sickness like chronic wasting disease or something else weird. I yanked my hand back quickly, regretting touching the strange animal. Could be diseased or rabid, I thought. I grabbed some hand sanitizer from my pack and rubbed it hard on my hand. When I looked up again after about half a minute, I nearly lost it. The buck's face was inches from mine. Its mouth was wide open, and a low, guttural growl was coming from its throat. Its breath reeked of rot and death. Inside its mouth were blackish, tumor-like lumps. The skin on its neck was twisted unnaturally so it could put its face close to me. I scrambled back and got to my feet, holding my breath like I could block out the stench. The buck didn't move or follow me. I ran past it, watching it carefully, and even then it stayed frozen. It never moved again while I could still see it. I walked for hours after that. I passed the second campsite I planned to use on my hike and headed toward the last one. Even though I was exhausted, the image of that deer, the feeling of those things writhing inside it, and the smell of its rotting innards haunted me. I wanted to get as far away from it as possible before I tried to sleep. It took me a few more hours to reach the final campsite. My legs were aching even though I took several breaks along the way. Luckily, the rest of the evening was quiet. I ate some energy bars, drank plenty of water, and watched the sun go down. About 30 minutes after the sun disappeared, I slipped into my tent and collapsed into my sleeping bag. I have no idea how long I slept before my eyes suddenly snapped open. I heard footsteps outside, slow, heavy but smooth, moving on dirt and rocks. My fire was still glowing softly in the fire pit, and soon I saw a shadow move between the embers and my tent walls. It was a deer again, this time a doe. Her silhouette moved into my camp, getting closer to my tent. Right away, her walk seemed strange. She wasn't cautious. Instead, she moved with purpose, almost mechanically. She put her full weight down with every step without hesitation. Her head didn't dart around, and her ears didn't twitch to listen to sounds nearby. She seemed like she was moving on autopilot. Then she stopped, all four hooves firmly on the ground, completely still. I watched for a few minutes, expecting her to move on, but she didn't. Just before I shouted at her to leave, I saw her head turn. I couldn't tell if she looked toward me or away, but somehow I already knew the answer. My heart sank when that same deep growling noise came from her throat again, louder this time. Was this doe infected too? Maybe she was farther along with whatever sickness or parasite the buck had. Then a wet, heavy sound dropped to the ground beneath her. I lay there frozen, shocked. There was no way she just threw up something so big. It sounded like an entire organ had come up. Lost in disbelief, I jumped when I suddenly felt something slither beneath my right arm. I cursed and looked down under the tent flap. There was a big, worm-like lump moving right under my arm. Whatever it was slithered under the tent and popped out the other side, crawling away outside. Thank God it stayed outside my tent. I'm no fool, you're probably thinking what I was thinking. The things I felt inside that deer had come out of her mouth and were trying to crawl toward me. I stayed awake all night with that doe standing outside like a dead statue. A 36-year-old man, too scared to face a sick animal and too scared to deal with whatever slimy worms were inside it. Eventually, sleep took me. I woke up sitting in the corner of my tent just as the sun started shining through the trees. Slowly, I unzipped the tent door. The doe lay dead outside on the ground. I carefully put on my shoes and went outside to take a closer look. Her body was stiff and straight-legged. Her eyes were missing, and her belly looked impossibly thin and empty, like something had sucked all her insides out from the outside. There wasn't a drop of fluid on the ground. She had become a dry, flattened, empty corpse. I packed up my gear and left quickly. I put my tent into a separate trash bag. That worm thing had touched it, so I planned to burn the tent once I got home. The hike to the trailhead was easy and safe. I wasn't as sore as I thought I'd be after the long hike the day before. My truck started without a problem. No alien parasites or infected deer came after me. I just drove home. I called my mom to tell her about the weird stuff I saw, trying to laugh it off. I haven't gone back to the Ouachitas since. Now I make sure to camp and hike far away from that area. My drives to other trails are longer, but it's worth it to stay safe. God knows what's happening with the deer in the Ouachitas. In the spring of last year, farmers raising sheep near the border between Germany and the Netherlands reported several strange incidents. These reports mainly came from shepherds in the eastern part of the Netherlands and also down in the far southeast of the country. The farmers said that some of their sheep, and on a few occasions even their sheepdogs, were found killed. But oddly, the animals were not eaten. These incidents made the news multiple times because many thought wolves were responsible. But the attacks did not match typical wolf behavior. Wolves usually don't kill prey only to leave it behind. They also wouldn't normally challenge one or more sheepdogs protecting the flock. Most importantly, wolves don't usually enter areas where humans live, especially when those areas are protected by dogs and electric fences. Despite these precautions, there were still reports of sheep and sheepdogs being killed and sometimes partially eaten. In the southeast, 11 sheep were slaughtered, 6 of them lambs, but their bodies were untouched otherwise. Investigators found no evidence of how the attacker entered except for deep bite marks on the sheep's torn throats, and one set of large paw prints about 7 inches long. After that event, things were quiet for a while. Then new reports came in, this time from the eastern region, saying the attacks had been caused by wolves. DNA testing from the bite marks on the dead sheep was said to confirm this. About a year later, a small group of wolves was confirmed to be living in the country's largest national park, Velью. Since then, there have been no more reports of sheep being killed, at least not in the news. The deaths of the 11 sheep in the southeast were also said to be caused by wolves, but there was never any DNA proof or solid evidence to back this claim. Some suggested these were young wolves searching for territory and killing sheep to show dominance to others. Yet, this didn't align with the idea that wolves avoid human areas guarded by dogs and electric fences. The whole situation felt odd. I have always loved walking in the forest at twilight, so much that I have done it at least 3 times this year, even though going into the woods after sunset or before sunrise is still illegal here. I often take short walks right before it gets dark, leaving when it is almost night, wearing dark clothes so I wouldn't be easily seen by forest rangers or anyone suspicious. I don't really know why I am so drawn to nighttime hikes in the woods, but I feel a strong pull to nature. Ever since my first off-trail walk in the summer of 2017, I've been excited every time I visit the forest, no matter the hour. Sometimes I even feel like hunting when I see deer or rabbits, though I don't have a license or weapons, so I never actually do. A few weeks ago, as autumn began, I went for another night walk in the forest. It was cloudy and rainy, so I brought my flashlight. As usual, I arrived on my mountain bike, locking it to a pole before heading into the dark woods. I passed by the last few people leaving, walking toward their cars, while I went in the opposite direction. By the time I reached the center of the forest, it was completely dark. I quietly enjoyed the cold air, the smells, and the sounds of the woods. I nearly forgot about what I had experienced in these same woods almost 2 years ago. I sat on a wooden bench nearby when I suddenly heard the faint bleating of sheep about 200 meters away. It sounded like they were scared and trying to run. I stood up and started walking toward the noise. I was surprised I could hear it from so far away, but I was even more surprised that I could smell the sheep too. The wind was blowing in my direction, and I didn't even know I had that ability. I should mention it is normal to find sheep here because local shepherds let their flocks graze in different parts of the forest to help control the weeds. One day they might be on a moor, another day near a lake. They use simple, easy-to-move electric fences to keep the sheep together. Tonight, the flock was on a small moor about 200 meters from where I had been sitting. It took me a while to get close since bushes blocked my view. But when I arrived at the pen, what I saw shocked me. The sheep were running wildly, trying to escape, and on the ground lay 2 sheep killed in a pool of blood. Their throats had been ripped open by jaws bigger than a dog's or even a wolf's. The fence showed no damage, but nearby there were large paw prints, like those of a big canine, carefully walking around the bodies in the pen, as if the attacker had been choosing its victims. The sight was frightening, but strangely, I wasn't as scared as I thought I would be. Instead, I felt annoyed. Annoyed that something or someone was disturbing my forest, which I had started to think of as a second home. Despite knowing it was risky, I decided to follow the tracks. I was curious to find out what was moving around the woods at night. If I had been wiser, I might have realized I was walking toward danger. I kept following the big tracks until the trees grew thick, blocking almost all the light. At that point, I changed my mind because I could barely see. I turned on my flashlight and shone it around. I could still hear the frightened sheep about 55 meters behind me. Suddenly, I became tense again as a new smell hit me, a mix of wet dog and fresh blood. Then I heard footsteps on the forest floor. The steps were calm, as if something was quietly coming to check me out. I pointed my flashlight toward the source of the sounds. What I saw first were eyes, glowing yellow, about 4 feet above the ground. This told me the creature was bigger than a dog or even a wolf. I froze as the creature moved closer. I could now see its face and front body. It looked like a wolf but was bigger and stronger. Its fur was dark on top and lighter underneath. It even had a short dark mane around its neck. The animal stared at me carefully but did not seem aggressive yet. Blood stained its snout, so I knew it was the one who killed the sheep. Now I was scared. Any sudden move or panic could be fatal. I had no chance against a creature this size. Still, it didn't attack. Came closer until it stood about 5 meters away. Then, to my shock, the creature rose up on its hind legs, like a bear, towering over me at about 7 feet tall. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up and took a firmer stance. I reminded myself not to show fear. It leaned forward a bit, sniffing the air to smell me. Then it perked its ears, seeming more suspicious. I knew that looking bigger usually stops some animals from attacking. But no matter how big I tried to look, this thing was still much bigger. Still, I tried to stay calm and not seem scared or fascinated. Somehow, this worked. The wolf-like beast stepped back a little and broke eye contact. I took a small step forward and tried to look more confident and territorial. I was trying to take control. Then, surprisingly, I spoke to it in a loud, commanding voice, telling it to leave my woods. I was shocked that it seemed to work. The creature growled softly, a sound like it was protesting, then got back on all fours and turned away. It disappeared into the dark, but before it vanished completely, it gave me one last, almost human-like look. Its eyes reflected my flashlight beam. When I no longer saw, heard, or smelled it, I let out a deep sigh of relief, loud enough that I feared it might hear me and come back. Then I started shaking. My mind and body realized I had just survived a life-or-death encounter with an animal unlike any normal creature. Cold chills ran down my back and I felt a bit sick. Suddenly, I was startled by a distant howl, far away but clear. It was haunting and beautiful, reminding me of a howl from a video game called The Hunter Classic. The sound made me feel even colder. All I wanted was to get out of those woods and back home. After about 20 minutes of fast walking back to my bike, constantly looking over my shoulder and stopping to carefully listen at every noise, I finally reached my bike. I quickly unlocked it and rode home as fast as I could. Back home, the reality hit me again. I might as well have been dead, like one of those sheep. When I calmed down, questions flooded my mind. Why didn't it attack me? Why did it react like that when it smelled me? Also strange, I never heard anything about the sheep killings in the news, not even on local channels. It was as if the whole event never happened. Maybe even the shepherd denied losing 2 sheep to some unknown predator. All I know is I won't tell anyone I know about what I saw. If it ever appears in the news, people will just say it was a wolf, like all the other sheep attacks in the Netherlands these last couple of years. And I will definitely stop my night walks in the forest, because next time I might not be so lucky. A few years ago, a couple buddies and I planned a hiking trip with a single night of camping along the Sierra Link Trail. And even though I can still remember that weekend like it was yesterday, part of me honestly wishes I could wipe it out of my head completely. It was supposed to be a chill day outside, just the 3 of us, something we'd been organizing for weeks. That first day, just about as good as it gets. We were pumped to hang out, sip a few cold ones, and get away from regular life for a while. We spent hours walking the trail, laughing, telling stories, and occasionally getting into a harmless debate over who the greatest Cowboys quarterback of all time was. When we eventually came across a solid spot to set up camp, close enough to a little fast-moving creek, we got our tents up and got to work on a fire. While the guys focused on getting it going, I walked down to the water to cool off a bit. It had been a sweaty, hot day. I took off my shirt, my bracelet, and a cheap watch I'd been wearing, then dunked the shirt in the water and used it to wipe off my upper body and, well, the lower half too. I was almost totally sure I slipped my watch into my shorts pocket, but once I got back to our site and reached for it, it was gone. I retraced my steps all the way back to the creek, eyes locked on the ground the entire way, but didn't see anything. It wasn't some fancy designer thing or anything, so it didn't ruin the trip. Still, I couldn't help but think, where the hell did that watch end up? After a while, I figured the strap probably got caught on my pocket and fell off while I was leaning into the stream. Sucks, but that's life sometimes. The rest of the trip was smooth. Nothing weird happened that night. The next morning, we packed up and started the hike back to where my buddy's car was parked. Just as we were about to finish the trail, maybe 80 yards from the lot, one of my friends stopped and pointed up ahead at something hanging from a tree branch. He said something like, "Hey, what's that?" I looked up and saw it too. It was my watch, tied kind of loosely to a thin branch, just dangling there in plain sight. The same guy turned to me and joked, "Imagine if that's the one you dropped." But the look on my face gave it away. He could tell I recognized it immediately. It really was my watch. Somebody must have found it and figured they'd hang it somewhere visible in case the owner came back that way. We were all like, "What are the odds?" And then my two buddies stepped aside so I could jog over and grab it. The branch was a bit taller than me, maybe a foot or two out of reach, so I backed up, took a quick run, jumped up and snagged it midair. But the second my hand closed around it, I felt something off. Once I landed on the ground again, I let go of it right away, fell into the dirt. The whole thing was coated in this thick, weirdly clear slime that caught the light in a way that didn't look right. And it didn't feel right either. It was sticky and oddly cold, like it had been sitting in a fridge or worse, a cave. It clung to my fingers, and I started scrubbing them on the nearest patch of grass, completely grossed out. Now, I know what some people might be assuming here, and no, it wasn't that. I mean that in the most straightforward way. My two friends immediately started cracking jokes like it was something nasty, and yeah, I get why they'd go there. It was funny for about a second, but that didn't explain what it actually was. One of them tossed out a guess, maybe some kind of sap. I said, "There's no way," and told him to touch it himself. Obviously, he passed on that. Then it became a whole other question. Who would have put it there? And what the hell was that stuff? It wasn't lotion or anything. It stunk like wet mold and chemicals, and there was no way it was any kind of hair product. I rinsed my fingers off with water from my bottle, then looked down at the watch. I thought about cleaning it too, but the more I stared at it, the more I realized I just didn't want it anymore. I didn't want anything to do with it. The whole vibe of our trip just kind of deflated. That lighthearted feeling we had all morning was gone, replaced by this weird tension none of us could quite explain. If it was all just a prank, then fine. Honestly, I'd prefer that. Maybe it was some hikers messing around while also trying to do a good deed. But the alternatives, those were harder to sit with. The ride home was quiet. We were all thinking the same thing but didn't talk about it. Everyone kept their own thoughts to themselves. I couldn't stop picturing the watch, covered in that gunk, left there like a message or a trap. I tried to reason through it once I got home. Spent time online trying to find anything about some natural explanation. Some fungus, sap, animal secretion, anything. Came up empty. But what really stuck with me wasn't just the goo or the watch. It was that heavy, skin-crawling sense that we brushed up against something we weren't supposed to. Something off. Months rolled by and it stopped being a regular thought. Life carried on. But every now and then, I'd catch sight of someone wearing a similar watch or read something about missing people in the wilderness, and I'd get thrown right back to that patch of trail in California. I've gone on plenty of hikes since then. I've never had another experience quite like it. Still, something changed in me. Even in the most peaceful spots, there's always a small part of me on edge, half expecting to come across something strange again. The Sierra Link Trail is still beautiful, still a place people go to clear their heads and unplug. But for me, there's always this sliver of unease. All because of that stupid watch, dangling from a tree, smeared with some strange substance, placed there by someone or something I'll probably never understand. And whatever it was, it made me realize there are things out there we haven't figured out yet. Things we probably walk past all the time, completely unaware. This happened to me last year when I was stuck at home during quarantine. I've actually had a strange run-in with some kind of mysterious creature before. It was July when this took place, right after summer classes finished. I'm 18 now, and I was 18 back then. Around late June and early July, we had finished all our school assignments. If you didn't have anything left to do, you didn't have to go to any in-person classes. We all loved fishing. It was basically the only thing we could do outside. Every morning at around 5:30, 6 of my friends would get up. One of us would pick up the others since we all lived nearby. We'd go to the same lake, which was pretty big, and fish for trout and bass. It was perfect because there was a bait shop just a couple minutes away. On the last day of school, we decided to try a new spot. We all used this app called Fish Finder where you can see fishing spots near you. We found a place that looked really good for trout. There were several spots that were known for rainbow trout, brook trout, and sometimes brown trout. It was about a 35-minute drive, and we all agreed to check it out. My friend Jason drove us all there, and we had to walk a trail to reach the fishing spots. The trail was roughly 4 miles long. We got there around 6:15 in the morning. We unloaded our gear and started hiking. I like fly fishing, so I brought my fly rod for the shallow streams where small trout hang out, and a regular rod for deeper holes where bigger trout wait. We walked for about 10 minutes and reached the first fishing spot. It was small, only room for about 3 people. So we split up into groups of 3. My friends Ryan, Sam, and I went together, and the other 3, Matt, Jason, and Cole, went separately. We all agreed to meet back at the start of the trail by noon. The other group left, and we stayed behind at a creek with a few rainbow trout swimming around. It was great for fly fishing. My friends walked a bit upstream where there was a deep hole with a large trout and some sunfish. I kept feeling bites on my line but couldn't catch anything. After about 20 minutes, I heard some noise nearby. Ryan and Sam were messing around trying to catch the rainbow trout. At first, I thought it might be a deer, so I ignored it. But the noise got louder. Then Ryan and Sam heard it too and stopped what they were doing. It didn't sound like a deer. It sounded more like a bear. We decided to hike to another spot. After about 5 or maybe 10 minutes of walking, Ryan thought he heard someone talking. We froze. Then all of us heard it. Someone or something was quietly talking. The voice got louder. Soon, I heard it trying to copy my friend Matt's voice, saying, "Guys, come here." Jason heard himself. We knew that wasn't Matt. It sounded strange. Too rough, too fake. We called Matt's phone to check where he was. He answered. When we asked where they were, he said something that sent chills down my spine. "In this heat, we're at a little hole about 15 minutes away from you. We caught a smallmouth bass. What about you?" I hung up and looked toward where we heard the voice again. Then we heard a low, raspy growl, angry and deep. I remembered a funny scene from a cartoon where the character says, "I'm so scared." We messaged Matt that we were coming to him and told him to stay put. We kept walking, and about 5 minutes later, we heard the voice again. This time it sounded like my friend Cole, or at least it was supposed to. "Guys, Matt twisted his ankle and needs help." We knew that wasn't Cole, so we kept moving. We finally caught up with them and told them what had happened. We left the mountain quickly and drove home. We talked about what it might have been but couldn't come up with a good answer. If anyone has any ideas, I'd really like to hear them. A few summers back, I worked at a vacation resort during the summer. Whenever I got the chance, I'd hike, camp, and explore the wild areas nearby. The resort was near Lake Havasu, and I knew there were many untouched canyons and old ruins scattered around. One late afternoon, after spending the day exploring new beaches and large water pools deep in the desert, I was driving back to the dorms the resort provided for seasonal staff without campers. Keep in mind, Lake Havasu is in a desert region, so the land is wide open with low bushes everywhere. Some parts of the land were used for cattle, with cowboys moving herds, and you could often spot cowboys riding horses as you passed by. On my way back to the dorms, I glanced to my right, which was mostly brushland, and saw some lights. They looked like campfires, but this time of year campfires weren't allowed. Curious, I pulled over. Those roads were empty at night, and there were no street lamps for miles around. I turned off the car and stared at the lights. I had always liked Native American tales about desert creatures, so I wasn't scared. I thought it was probably just a campsite. As I watched, I started to think maybe I was spying on people. But then the lights moved. I stepped to the other side of the road to get a better look. I noticed there was no talking, no laughter, no normal campsite noises. That made me even more curious, but careful not to step too far into the brush. The lights weren't near the ground. They were at least 4 feet off the ground. My mind jumped to ghost light stories, the kind where you're warned never to follow them. A small voice in my head told me to stop, but before I could react, my legs moved. Before I knew it, my shoes were full of sand and brush as I walked toward the lights. It felt like I wasn't in control of my body, though I was wide awake. The lights got closer but seemed to notice me. They turned and moved deeper into the desert. When I reached the spot where the lights had been, there was a warm, calm feeling and a lot of broken stones around a clear area. It looked like a house might have stood there once. When I got to the center of that open space, my legs stopped on their own. The lights vanished, and suddenly the air turned cold. The wind blew harder. It was a cold unlike the usual desert chill at night. I felt like I was being watched, like I'd stepped into someone's home uninvited. I looked around and saw a narrow path leading away. I thought that would be the best way out. I glanced back, still uneasy, and noticed the lights were slowly returning. They seemed to be waiting for me to leave. I silently said I was sorry for disturbing their resting place and promised not to come back unless they wanted me to. The lights disappeared and flickered back like a slow flash. I didn't feel good about them, so I headed down the path to my car. Just as I got inside, there was a sharp tap on my window, like someone was telling me to wait. I looked back toward the place where the lights were. It looked like a group sitting around a campfire. I knew no one was there. This time, I didn't feel unwelcome, just like they wanted to be left alone. I said a quick prayer and drove off. The next day, I asked some coworkers to come with me to the spot. All we found were old building ruins and some broken pots. I felt that same feeling of not wanting to bother anything, so we left. As we walked away, the wind grew stronger, and I thought I heard a soft whisper say, "Thank you, /music." Over the years at Lake Havasu, I've had many strange experiences, often linked to Native American legends. I never asked questions because I didn't want to become part of the story myself. What I'm about to write is without a doubt the most horrifying experience of my life, and my ex-girlfriend's too. I'm doing this by choice, though I had to get her approval before sending it in for the purpose of having it possibly shared publicly. Her one main rule was that I stick strictly to the facts and that anyone who reads this shows basic decency about what happened. So if you're reading this, please respect that. It would save me a ton of stress if you did. With that said, here's the story. Back in 2012, my girlfriend at the time, let's call her Jenna, and I decided to go on a day hike in the northern part of Oregon, in a region known as Birch Hollow. Birch Hollow sits along the Ridge River, just off Highway 52. It's boxed in by the Eldridge Mountains to the east and the Red Horn Peaks to the west, with scattered woodlands and valleys in between. There are probably only a few hundred people living in the area, mostly tucked away in small homes or cabins built along the creeks and winding dirt roads that split off from the main highway and disappeared deep into the trees. One thing I didn't know until later was that Birch Hollow was once the site of something called the Liberty Territories movement. If I remember right, it began when some early settlers stumbled upon a pocket of gold and wanted to declare their own state separate from Oregon and Washington, so they wouldn't have to pay taxes on the find. That might sound kind of harmless, maybe even noble in that no taxation without representation sort of way. But after the Civil War, the place became a magnet for people obsessed with independence and rebellion. Not the harmless kind either. Even after the original separatists and rogue settlers faded away by the early 1900s, Birch Hollow held onto its unspoken reputation as a kind of last refuge for those who wanted to vanish: loners, fugitives, outlaws. And now, in my own way, I can confirm that reputation is very real. Jenna and I got there around early afternoon. After grabbing a quick meal at a diner in town, we set out for a loop trail that wrapped around the western edge of Oakback Ridge and led up near Blacktail Bluff before curving back toward town. It was everything we wanted: peaceful, fresh-smelling woods, with crisp mountain air and the sound of the wind through tall pines. It felt like a great break from our jobs, responsibilities, and the grind of everyday life. Plus, hiking had become a way for us to really talk, especially since we both had long hours and didn't always get that kind of time anymore. Around 3:15 p.m., we were making our way up a mild slope. We were sweating a little but still joking around when we saw something strange. Every so often we'd come across smaller trails splitting off the main path. Sometimes we checked them out, sometimes not. This one, we followed maybe 300 feet before we found a small log cabin tucked in a clearing. It was partially hidden by a wall of brush. It would have looked cozy, like something off a postcard, if not for the rusted-out pickup parked in front of it with the driver's door hanging wide open. The cabin's door was also swung inward. As we stepped closer, a man walked out from inside. He was moving quickly. He didn't look threatening at first, maybe late 30s, medium build, but something about the way his eyes flicked over us made me tense up. He gave a quick smile and a wave, saying something like, "You're a long way off the main path." He didn't seem aggressive at first, polite even, but there was something too observant about his glance, like he was analyzing, not just looking. I kept things friendly, saying we were out for a day hike. He nodded and we chatted briefly about the weather and the trail. Nothing serious. Then I said something like, "Well, we should keep moving. Still got a ways to go." That's when he asked if we wanted to come inside for a cup of coffee. We turned it down gently, saying we were trying to make it back before dark. But he didn't drop it. He stepped closer, waving off our excuses, saying it was no big deal, that it was rare to meet anyone out here and that we looked like we could use a quick break. We smiled politely and said no again, but he didn't back off. What had been casual and friendly suddenly became pushy, not in volume but in tone. I glanced at Jenna. She looked uneasy too. We started backing away slowly, but as soon as we moved, he reached behind his back and pulled out a handgun. He barked at us, "Get inside, now." We froze, both of us paralyzed with fear. When he aimed the weapon straight at us, it was clear we had no choice. He kept the barrel on us as we walked into the cabin. Once we were inside, he slammed the door shut and locked it. Then he shouted toward the empty clearing, something like, "They'll be here any second." After locking the door, he herded us into a back corner and ordered us to sit. Jenna asked who he meant by they, her voice barely above a whisper, but he ignored her, just shoved us toward the floor and told us to stay still. I did something stupid then. I repeated the question, trying to sound calm but firm. I said something like, "She asked you something." He spun away from the window, rushed toward me, and slammed the handle of his pistol straight into the side of my face. I dropped, clutching my cheek as blood ran down my jawline. Jenna screamed. He snapped at her to be quiet and barked at both of us not to speak again. She asked if she could help stop the bleeding. He laughed bitterly and said, "Why bother? We're all gonna be dead soon anyway." That rattled both of us. He went back to the window, peeking out constantly, but jerking his head back at us every time we moved so much as an inch. Time warped in that cabin. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as I tried to comfort Jenna, whispering that we were going to get out of this. But inside I was scanning for anything, firewood, tools, anything I could use to fight back. There wasn't much. One door, one window, and nothing we could reach without drawing his attention. Every time he pointed the gun at us, I thought that was it. But instead, he just told us to shut up, that our whispers were messing with his head. I think we sat there for maybe an hour. Could have been less. Hard to say. Eventually, we figured out that they probably meant the police. That was confirmed when we heard the faint whoop-whoop of helicopter blades. The man froze, then muttered, "They're here." In any other moment, hearing police would have been a relief. But in that cabin, it didn't feel like that. It just raised the stakes. As the helicopter closed in and the sound of engines and voices reached us, he snapped. He pointed the gun at us and said, "If they come in, you're dead. You make sure that doesn't happen." We nodded, not because we meant it, but because we didn't want to die. Then the chopper was directly overhead. Loud voices rang out, commands shouted over megaphones. A SWAT team had arrived. The man ran to the window, shouting back, "I got 2 hostages. You come in and I'll kill them." Over the loudspeaker, a voice shouted, "This is the police. Come out with your hands up." He grabbed Jenna and yanked her to the window, yelling, "You see her? You see her face? I'll blow it off." She sobbed and tried to pull away, but he jammed the gun into her cheek. I tried to tell her it would be okay, kept repeating that it would all be okay. The cops must have backed off, because the guy started grinning, shouting, "Yeah, that's right, back up. Go on, back up." Then he dragged Jenna back to the corner and stood between us and the door. He kept yelling that we'd be his body shields if the police broke in. But suddenly something happened outside. something that made him stop cold. He ran back to the window. We couldn't see what was going on, but we heard shouting louder now. He started firing. Out the window, random shots aimed at the approaching officers. A moment later, bullets blasted through the cabin frame. One shattered the wood next to him. He ducked, then whirled around and pointed the gun at me. "Kneel," he said. "Hands behind your back." I didn't want to move. I knew what this meant. It felt like the final step before execution. My body wouldn't cooperate. My legs barely supported me, but I knew if I didn't follow the order, I was dead right there. So I did it. I told Jenna I loved her, then made my way to the center of the room and dropped to my knees. He jammed the barrel against the back of my head, then screamed toward the front door, "You come in here. I'll kill him. You hear me? I'll blow his head off." And in those last few seconds, those heart-pounding moments before the police finally stormed the place, I accepted that I might be about to die. My name is Erica. I'm from San Diego, and I recently came across your show on Spotify. I think I have a story your audience might find interesting. Back in 2014, I read a memoir titled Untamed Journey by Cheryl Lanes. The book tells how the author's world unraveled after losing her mother, and how hiking became her way of healing and rebuilding her life. Most of the story takes place along the Pacific Crest Trail, with the tough journey pushing the author to gain deep personal insight. To me, it felt like hiking hundreds of miles helped her tap into some ancient wisdom that most of us never reach. I was 23 when I first read it, and honestly, no book or movie had ever hit me quite like that. I longed for that same sense of clarity, the kind that helps you truly understand what matters in life and what doesn't. But I didn't think I had it in me to do something like hike the PCT on my own. That changed around 2017, when I finally caught the hiking bug. I started piecing together plans for my own short trek along the Pacific Crest Trail, hoping to experience even a little of that same transformative power I'd read about in Untamed Journey. Because I couldn't take too much time off from work, I chose a 5-day section near a town called Tehachapi, way out on the western edge of the Mojave Desert. I picked that area for 3 reasons. 1, I loved that part of the book where Cheryl writes about that region. 2, I could drive there without too much trouble. And 3, I was honestly a little nervous about hiking the northern stretches of the trail during colder seasons. This was going to be my first real trip outdoors, and after hearing all kinds of horror stories about mishaps, I knew better than to take on too much too fast. Please feel free to chuckle at that. So, it was 5 nights in Southern California to try to taste even a sliver of what Cheryl had described. On day 1, I left for Tehachapi really early in the morning. I parked my car at a small RV park where I'd arranged to leave it for the next several days. Then, I set off on a 9-mile hike toward a place known as Twin Pines. Let me tell you, by the end of that hike, I was completely wiped out. The sun was still blazing even though it was early fall. I couldn't wait to reach Lake Isabel the following day. I'd read that since the water there came down from the higher mountains, it could get icy cold during certain times of the year. Some people wrote about that like it was a downside, but after how hot I was, it sounded like heaven. The next morning, I woke up knowing I had a full 20-mile hike ahead of me from Twin Pines to Lake Isabel. I called that my test day. The 9 miles from the first day had been kind of a warm-up, just to let me find my rhythm, get used to the trail, and figure out how to navigate. But day 2 was my real challenge, where I tried to match the intense pace described in Untamed Journey. Unfortunately, I picked one of the roughest stretches for that push. The second day required me to climb out of a steep valley, and my legs weren't at all prepared for that kind of effort. They ached like crazy. The only comfort came from the shady patches where trees dotted the chaparral, and eventually, the cool waters of Lake Isabel. I was so worn out that I nearly passed out by 9:30 that night. By the next morning, I woke up stiff, exhausted, and frustrated at myself for overdoing it. The third day's hike was around 13 miles, not as grueling as the day before, but I was so drained I wasn't sure I could finish in time. My goal was to reach the Sugar Hill campground because I knew it had several amenities I'd be desperate for after 3 days on the trail. But that 20 miles on day 2 had nearly broken me. so facing another long hike didn't exactly lift my spirits. Hiking through the open land near Isabel was tiring but pretty straightforward. The trail was easy to follow. But in the afternoon, as I started heading into higher ground, I hit a few patches of woods where the path wasn't nearly as clear. At one point, I stepped off the trail to find a bathroom spot, and when I came back, I thought I'd picked up the same trail again. But after about 10 to 15 minutes, I noticed that it opened up into a dirt road, and I realized I was being led away from the PCT in the direction of a place called Wofford Hills. I figured it was a good moment to stop, sip some water, and check my map to make sure I was heading the right way. I honestly thought I was completely alone. There hadn't been a single person in sight for hours, but as I was scanning my map, a man's voice suddenly startled me. All he said was, "Hey there," in this upbeat, friendly tone. I jumped a bit, and we both kind of laughed about it after he saw that he'd surprised me. He was a short guy with a deep tan, wearing a vest, shorts, and sandals. He had a dusty-colored, wide-brimmed hat on, and he told me his name was Martin. Said he lived nearby in a cabin closer to the highway, and that he often crossed paths with hikers during his afternoon strolls through the hills. His words, not mine. Martin offered to walk me back toward the trail and point me to the path that would take me to Sugar Hill Campground. He seemed easygoing and kind, so I figured why not. We walked at a relaxed pace, chatting a bit about what I was doing and why I chose that part of the trail. He said he thought it was cool that a book inspired me to go on a real-life adventure. He mentioned that back in his younger days, he'd wanted to take a long road trip after reading On the Road by Jack Carson. He also said I'd picked a good stretch of trail, tough for someone new to hiking maybe, but that I should be proud for getting that far without quitting. At that moment, his words meant everything to me, and I think Martin will always have a soft spot in my heart because of that encouragement. But I'm sad to say my memory of him is also tied to the warning he gave me. It was a warning that, looking back, I'm glad I heard, but it's also the thing that makes that day stay with me in a much darker way. Martin told me that the wild land between Black Rock and Sugar Hill Mountain was some of the most untouched in the country. Officially, it was government-owned, and no one but rangers was allowed to build out there. But unofficially, the hills north of the Alamo Sierra region were home to someone unusual. He called him Old Ron. Said Ron had been living off the grid in those woods for longer than anyone could remember. He was an oddball, sure, but never caused harm. At least that's what Martin said. I can't recall his exact wording, but as soon as he said, "He's never hurt anyone," I got uneasy. Felt like a strange thing to include. I asked Martin what he meant by unusual, if he had to follow it with a line like that. He said, more or less, that it was a long story and probably not worth getting into, especially since I likely wouldn't even see the guy. But if I did, on the off chance I crossed paths with Old Ron, I was not to worry, he was no threat at all. Still, I didn't feel entirely reassured. But I wasn't helpless either. Carrying a concealed weapon in California while hiking the PCT is no simple task. The permit process involved a maze of different laws and steps. I'd done my homework, applied through the San Bernardino County office, submitted the required proof of address, ID photos, and passed a firearms safety class. After submitting everything online and passing a live fire qualification with the gun I planned to carry, I just had to wait on the background check. Once that was cleared, I finally picked up my license. After that, I made sure to brush up on PCT-specific rules for firearm carry. Because to be honest, there was no way I was going to spend days alone in the backcountry without something to protect myself. On the advice of someone who worked at an outdoor supply shop, I bought a Sig Sauer P365. It's been my trail buddy ever since. I knew how to use it, and I wasn't overly scared about running into some weird mountain loner, even if he was a little off. Still, I stayed on high alert after parting ways with Martin. My eyes were scanning constantly as I hiked up into the pine-covered slopes. I moved along quickly during that second part of the day's walk. By the time I caught sight of signs for Sugar Hill, I decided it was time for a break. I sat down, rested, and sipped some water. That simple act, drinking water after marching through the hot, dusty hills, felt almost holy. It reminded me that just being alive, even in a quiet, humble way, can be something worth being thankful for. Some things never lose their power. Quenching my thirst never got old. It only felt more rewarding with each mile. I sat there in silence, just breathing and enjoying the stillness of a wild place that hadn't yet been tamed. Then I saw him, about 50 or 60 yards away, just off the path and behind the trees. I spotted a figure. He stepped out from behind a trunk slowly. He looked like he was dressed in camouflage, muddy brown and green pants and a long-sleeved shirt. His beard and hair were long, tangled, and greasy. From that distance, his face was hidden beneath a mess of hair and whiskers. I couldn't even see his eyes, just a rough patch of skin peeking out. I knew exactly who it was. I didn't need a second guess. He stood there, completely still, just staring at me. He saw that I was watching him too, but he didn't flinch, didn't turn away. It was old Ron. It had to be. And even though I was shaking inside, I raised my arm and gave a little wave. Probably the most awkward wave I've ever made. Then, not sure if this is strange or not, but one of my go-to things is slipping away into this small patch of woods right behind where we live. It's only about a 5-minute stroll from my house to this old trail that nobody else ever seems to bother with. Honestly, it's perfect when you're the kind of teen who doesn't like being around people much. I just put in my earbuds, let some music or a random podcast play, and walk around until I feel ready to go back home. A bunch of my classmates think I'm crazy for wandering around alone out there, but I've never seen a single other person in that spot, so to me it feels totally fine. That's why I didn't think anything of it when I went out there one random Wednesday afternoon. School had been annoying that day, 2 surprise tests and an assembly that I couldn't care less about. I needed to chill out. I had my bag over my shoulder, phone tucked in my hoodie, music playing in my ears. I was already halfway through my playlist when I decided to stray a little off my usual route. I was curious if there might be any odd mushrooms or neat flowers. Anything to take my mind off the school stress. I was walking pretty fast when my foot landed on something that felt really weird. Not the soft dirt or dry leaves I'm used to. It had this squishy texture, like maybe a rotting piece of fruit or a soap sponge. It felt so nasty under my shoe that I jumped back right away. My heart started thudding because it didn't feel like part of the ground. Not like it moved or anything, but it gave me the impression I had just stepped on something alive. I yanked out my earbuds and looked down, trying to figure out what kind of strange mushroom or maybe dead animal I'd stepped on. But as soon as I saw it, I knew it wasn't either of those. The dirt had this nearly perfect shape of a person's face. Eyes shut, lips slightly open, even a nose that looked completely real. It looked like someone had formed a lifelike human face right there in the soil, and the coloring and texture blended with the ground so well that I wouldn't have noticed it if I hadn't stepped on it. It reminded me of that scene from an old movie, The Hunger Games, I think, where one of the characters camouflages himself to look like a rock. But this wasn't painted or anything. It was just flat with the earth and dirt colored. Even weirder, my shoe print was still visible on its cheek. But unlike the rest of the dirt where my foot had flattened it, this part had bounced back slightly, like it had the softness of real skin. I stood there frozen, jaw open. It had to be some sort of strange art project, right? But I come out here all the time and have never seen anyone else. And who would go through the trouble of crafting a hyper-realistic face in the dirt out here where nobody would see it? I could see every tiny detail, the lines, the flaws, everything you'd find on a real person's face. For some reason, I reached out and poked it. Guess my brain doesn't work right when I'm freaked out. I expected it to feel dry like soil or maybe break apart like wet clay. But the moment my finger touched the cheek, I screamed. It was warm, felt like skin. Not just like clay that had been out in the sun, but like something real, fleshy, like I had just poked someone's face. And then, I swear to you, the eyelid flinched. Maybe I imagined it, but I was sure it moved. I screamed louder than I ever have, even with my earbuds still partly in. My whole body felt like it buzzed with panic. The hairs on my arms stood straight up and I took off running, stumbling over fallen branches, crunching through leaves, nearly tripping over my own feet. My backpack kept smacking against me while some bright, upbeat pop song still played in my ears, which somehow made everything feel more messed up. I couldn't listen to that song for weeks after. It made me sick to think about. By the time I got back to the house, I was soaked in sweat. My mom asked what was wrong, and I blurted out something like, "There was a face. There was a face in the ground." Of course, that didn't make any sense, so I had to go back and explain. I told her I thought I found something like a buried person or maybe something else I couldn't even explain. She told me I probably imagined it or stepped on a dead animal and let my imagination run wild. But when she saw how freaked out I looked, pale and shaky, she agreed to go back with me the next day. She wanted to wait until there was more sunlight, which made sense. So the next morning, we headed out there. She walked right beside me, and my chest felt tight the whole time. The woods felt different, like something was watching us. And I kept thinking, if there are faces in the ground, what else might be here? I told myself it was still going to be there. I'd find some weird imprint. Anything I could show her to prove I wasn't just imagining it. But of course, there was nothing. That spot just looked like regular dirt. Maybe slightly stirred up, but no face. No warmth either. In fact, it felt chilly just like the rest of the ground. We even brought a little hand trowel and dug around for a bit, hoping to find something under the surface. All we found were rocks and roots. No strange shapes. No flesh-like earth. Nothing. My mom kept teasing me afterward. Said maybe I saw a funny pile of leaves or sticks that looked weird from the right angle. Called me a nut. I just rolled my eyes. But honestly, part of me felt better that it was gone. If it had still been there, I don't know what I would have done. That would have meant it was real. Still, I can't shake how vivid that memory is. It's only been a few weeks since it happened, and I still take walks out there. I don't listen to music anymore though, not all the time. And I always keep my eyes on the ground. Because if I ever step on another face like that again, I might actually lose it. The night it happened, my sister and I were walking back from our friend Maria's house. We lived in one of those rural-style subdivisions where each house sat on a few acres, separated by thick tree lines. Maria's place was only a short hike away, maybe just over a mile, a route we knew well and had taken many times before. Usually, our parents insisted on picking us up after dark, but they were out that evening at a dinner get-together. We had no other ride, and we'd ended up staying at Maria's longer than we meant to, glued to our favorite shows and forgetting about the time. When we noticed it was almost 10 at night, we decided not to bother our parents and just make the walk home ourselves. My sister, I'll refer to her as Nina, was 18 back then, about 3 years older than I was. There wasn't much moonlight that night, and the sky was pitch black. The patches of woods between the homes were darker than usual. We used our phone flashlights, but they barely cut through the dark, lighting only a few feet ahead. The temperature had dropped while we were inside too. I could see our breath puffing out in small clouds. About halfway through our walk, as we were entering a thicker wooded area between properties, Nina came to a full stop. "I heard something," she said. I hadn't noticed anything, so I quietly asked her what she heard. My voice was as hushed as hers, though I wasn't sure why I felt the need to whisper. "Heavy breathing," she muttered. We both stood still, listening now that our footsteps had gone quiet. Then I heard it too, a rough inhale followed by a rattling exhale. It was coming from behind us. "Probably just a dog," I said, though even to me it didn't sound like one. We sped up, not running, but definitely moving faster. The trail narrowed and we had to walk single file. Nina led the way and I hated being in the back. The strange breathing kept up, always at the same distance. It wasn't closing in, but it wasn't falling behind either. Then we heard footsteps, not the uneven 4-beat rhythm of an animal, but the steady, clumsy sound of something walking on 2 legs. Step, drag, as if one of its legs wasn't working properly. I froze and swept my phone's light behind me. For a second, I caught a silhouette between the trees, tall and skinny. It had to be at least 30 yards away, maybe less. The beam didn't stay on it long, but I saw just enough to realize this wasn't a person or a dog. It was too lean, with visible bones, a long, narrow face like a dog's snout, and upright, pointed ears. I couldn't tell if it had fur or was bare-skinned. "Nina?" I whispered, grabbing the back of her coat. "There's something back there." She turned around, but by then whatever I'd seen had stepped back into the shadows. "I don't see anything," she said. "You're scaring me." "I don't mean to, but I swear it was there. We should run." She didn't need convincing. We both took off, sprinting. Our house was maybe a quarter-mile away, just one more stretch of woods to go through. The breathing behind us grew louder. The footsteps changed. Step, 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 step. No more dragging. It had started running too. We burst out of the trees and onto our street, panting. There were no other people outside. No cars, no lights from other homes. Just us and whatever was back there. Our house sat at the end of a small court. The porch light was on, casting a warm glow that felt so far away, even though it was only a few dozen yards. We dashed up our long driveway. Nina got to the front door first and pulled the handle. "It's locked," she shouted. "Your keys." "Where are your keys?" I reminded her she had her own set. As she fumbled for them, I turned around. For a moment, I thought maybe the thing had stopped following us. But then I saw it. It was crouched at the edge of our driveway, where it met the road, trying to hide behind the shadows from our neighbor's hedges. But I could still see it. The shape was more distinct now. Painfully thin with twisted limbs, a long skull with a sharp snout. And it was watching us. Why wouldn't it be? It had followed us all the way here. Worse still, I could hear it breathing. Thought it was hidden, but it wasn't. "Nina, it's right there," I said, barely able to speak. Behind me, I could hear her struggling with her keys. After what felt like forever, she finally got the door open. I practically shoved her out of the way and jumped inside. We slammed the door shut, locked it, then ran to the living room window. We peeked through the curtain, and it was gone. The space by the hedge was empty. Our parents came home about an hour later. We told them everything, every detail, even the creature's strange shape. Dad didn't believe we saw anything paranormal, but he was definitely worried. He's the kind of guy who, if you told him a monster followed you home, he'd grab a flashlight and head outside with a shovel, convinced it was just some animal. Mom was more open to the idea that something unusual happened. She kept asking us for details, what it looked like, how tall it was, how it moved. "Probably just a squatter," Dad said. "Or teenagers pulling a dumb prank." "I don't think it was a person," Nina told him. "You didn't see it." "Well, I'm looking now," he said, checking the window. "Nothing out there anymore. But next time, no more walking after dark. Call us. Don't do this again." Later that night, maybe around midnight, Dad remembered he hadn't taken the garbage out. Something he did every night without fail because Mom hated waking up to the smell. Mom was upstairs and Nina and I were still in the kitchen, too jittery to sleep, when we heard a sudden cry outside. Followed by a loud thump against the house, we jumped. Then we heard Dad's voice. "Let me in. Open the door." We ran to the back. Dad stumbled inside. His face was pale, twisted with pain and disbelief. I saw that his pajama pants were torn and his ankle was bleeding badly. Mom rushed downstairs, yelling, "What happened?" "Something bit me," Dad said, limping inside. It was low to the ground. I didn't see it right away. It was hiding near the garbage bins. It lunged at my leg and sank its teeth in. When I shouted, it stood up, on two legs. He paused, catching his breath. That thing was taller than me when it got up. Mom helped him into a chair while Nina grabbed the first aid kit. As Mom cleaned the wound, I saw it, deep, narrow punctures in a perfect half circle. Not like a dog bite, more like something with a small but powerful jaw. "We should call the police," Mom said, picking up her phone. "And tell them what?" Dad said. "That I was bitten by an animal and it walked off on two legs? They'll think I've lost it." He still insisted it was probably just a big coyote or a feral dog, even though he admitted it stood taller than him. Just to be safe, he got the full set of rabies shots. He even told the ER staff it was a stray mutt. The wound healed okay, but something in Dad shifted after that night. Not in a spooky movie way, no werewolf nonsense, but in how he acted. He installed new floodlights all around the yard, upgraded the alarm system, and came up with new house rules. No one takes out the garbage after dark. No one walks the dog past sunset. No one goes out at night, period. Whatever followed us that night, I believe it's still out there, staying low, hiding in the shadows, waiting for someone else to make the mistake of walking home through the trees. So if you had to place a bet on a fight, would you put your money on a massive man-eating spider that lives in a pine tree, or the bone-thin, crouching creature that followed two teens through the suburbs? Let me know in the comments. Thanks again for tuning in to Hidden Trails. I'm your host, Jay Whitlow. Be sure to follow me on Threads at Whitlow Dark, and grab my new book Tales from the Edge of Town on Amazon before the launch on August 12th, 2025. Links in the bio. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, don't forget to follow and leave a review for Hidden Trails. Until next time, stay alert out there. And remember, this world has edges darker than you think. I'm a Belgian native who has been exploring the local forests since childhood. My father used to lead me through the Ardennes, sharing tales of medieval warriors and ancient skirmishes. These woods have been a constant in my life, save for a few unsettling moments. What I'm about to recount spans over 3 years of hiking. I've never documented these experiences before. I'm not one to believe in the supernatural. In fact, I work as an engineer in Brussels. However, I can't rationalize what occurred during these 3 events. My partner, Amelie, accompanied me for 2 of them. She's even more skeptical than I am. A research scientist who insists on empirical evidence for everything, even when I forget to take out the trash. The fact that she witnessed these events too is the only reason I don't think I'm losing my mind. It was 2018, and I was hiking alone near Tenay-Bermont, close to the French border. Amelie had a conference that weekend, so I embarked on a familiar 18 kilometers loop by myself. The area is picturesque, with dense forests, small meadows, and rocky outcrops. I started early, around 7 a.m., aiming to finish before sunset. The weather was pleasant. By midday, I had made good progress and paused in a clearing for lunch. As I finished eating, the birds around me suddenly fell silent. In the forest, such silence often indicates a nearby predator. A fox, a wildcat, maybe even a human. But considering they hadn't gone quiet until just then, I assumed it wasn't because of me. I stood up and looked around, seeing nothing unusual, but the silence made me uneasy. Forests aren't supposed to be completely quiet. There's always the background noise of insects, birds, and rustling leaves. I packed up and continued on the trail. 10 minutes later, I reached a stream crossing. A narrow brook with stepping stones I'd crossed many times before, but something felt off. The air felt charged, like before a thunderstorm, though the sky was clear. As I approached the crossing, I saw a figure standing on the other side of the stream. They were completely motionless, not even breathing. They appeared to be wearing old-fashioned clothing, a long, dark coat or robe. I couldn't make out their face. It seemed to be in shadow despite the midday sun. Just in case it was an unusually still person, I raised a hand and called out, "Bonjour." The figure didn't move or respond. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Something about this figure wasn't right. They were slightly too tall, too thin, and lanky. They didn't look like someone who wanted to be out here or belonged here. I decided to cross anyway. There was no other path unless I wanted to backtrack several kilometers. I stepped onto the first stone, then the second. When I looked up again, the figure was gone. They couldn't have walked away in that time frame, not without me hearing or seeing it. It was as if they simply ceased to exist. One blink, and then the next just gone. I froze right there. What happened next is hard to describe. As I completed my crossing after eventually unfreezing myself, the forest around me changed, not dramatically, but everything looked slightly different. The light had a bluish quality it hadn't had before, and the temperature seemed to drop a few degrees. I continued hiking, now very creeped out, but nothing else unusual happened until I'd hiked another kilometer or so. That's when the bird sounds erupted all at once, returning in an instant, and as if I walked into a wall of warmth, the temperature instantly rose again. I swear to you, it was like I crossed into an invisible boundary. I checked my phone later and was upset to see that despite maintaining my usual pace, I was 2 hours behind on my hike. 2 hours that I cannot account for. I told no one about the experience for a while. I didn't want my friends or family worrying about my mental health. Seriously, I thought I had a brain tumor or something. How does one lose time and see things and hear things that are just wrong? This happened in the fall of 2019 in the forest of Louisiana Hoopa. This time, Amelie was with me. We planned a weekend hiking trip, staying at a small bed and breakfast in a nearby village. The forests in this region are associated with one of Belgium's most famous folktales, that of Clued. According to legend, Clued is a malevolent, shape-shifting spirit that haunts lonely travelers, especially near the water's edge. He appears in various forms: a winged phantom, a black dog, sometimes even a half-human tree creature. The stories say he lures travelers off their paths, leading them into bogs or dangerous terrain. Amelie and I had laughed about these stories over dinner the night before. She joked that the legends probably started because some drunk farmer got lost in the fog and needed an excuse for his wife. Our hike that day took us through dense forest, following a trail that occasionally ran alongside a series of small ponds. It was late October, and the autumn colors were at their peak. We'd been hiking for about 4 hours when dusk began to fall. We had headlamps but decided to start heading back. We didn't want to navigate the more difficult sections in the dark. As the light was fading, a mist developed from the forest floor. Not unusual for that time of year, but it grew uncommonly thick, reducing our visibility to maybe 10 meters ahead of us. We stayed close to the path, moving much more slowly, talking a bit louder than normal as if to make ourselves feel more safe. It was then that we saw the first light. It appeared to our right, maybe 30 meters into the forest. A pale blue-green glow hovering about a meter off the ground. Some kind of bioluminescent fungus, I thought. I'd never seen anything like that in Belgium, at least not that bright. "What is that?" Amelie whispered, grabbing my arm. Before I could answer, another light appeared to our left, and another ahead of us. Within moments, we were surrounded by perhaps a dozen of these glowing orbs, all roughly the same size and color, all hovering at the same height. "They look like lanterns," Amelie said, but they weren't lanterns. These things moved independently with an almost liquid motion, occasionally pulsing brighter or going dimmer again. They seemed to be closing in two, forming a circle around us. Within a minute, we were back to back, watching these lights get closer to us. Neither of us spoke about running. We didn't know where to run to. The path was now obscured by mist, and the forest was full of unseen hazards. Then, from somewhere in the darkness beyond the lights, came a sound I'll never forget. A kind of rattling hiss, like chains being dragged across leaves, followed by the distinct splashing of something heavy moving through water, though the nearest pond was about 100 meters away. One of the lights suddenly darted forward, stopping perhaps 5 meters from us. In its glow, I could now see that the mist around it seemed to form a vague shape, something that looked eerily like a human but distorted, as if viewed through warped glass. "We need to go," I told Amelie. We began to back away, still facing the lights. They followed but maintained their distance, not letting us break their circle. However, the rattling sound came again, closer this time, and a smell came with it, like stagnant water and rotting vegetables. Amelie was the more practical of us, as I said, and she remembered her phone. She clicked on the flashlight, hoping to drive away whatever creatures or insects were causing these phenomena. When she turned it on, she pointed it toward the nearest light, and something extraordinary happened. The beam of her phone light seemed to physically push against the strange glow, and it shrank back as if in pain. The misty shape around it contorted, and that hissing sound rose to an almost painful pitch. We didn't hesitate. We took the moment to run in the direction we'd been heading. Amelie's phone light carved a path through the now retreating lights behind us. The hissing, splashing sounds continued, but they grew fainter as we ran. After about 5 minutes of headlong flight, we burst out of the mist onto a clear section of path. The forest was normal again. No lights and no strange sounds, just the peaceful nighttime woods. Even then, we didn't stop running, not until we made it back to our car. Later, researching what we might have seen, we found references to something called faux fillets in local folklore. marsh lights that were said to be the souls of the unquiet dead, or sometimes manifestations of Clued himself. The rational explanation would be methane from decomposing matter, but that wouldn't explain their movement, the shapes in the mist, or that awful sound. Whatever we encountered that night, it wasn't mentioned in any scientific journal Amelie could find. The empty trail. This happened in the summer of 2020, again with Amelie. After our experience the previous autumn, we'd been more cautious about our hikes, staying on popular trails and avoiding going out after dusk. But as time passed without incident, we gained our confidence back, for better or for worse. One hike, we chose a well-traveled route in the Sunnian forest just outside Brussels. This ancient beech forest is beautiful but much less remote than our previous hiking locations. On weekends, you'd typically encounter dozens of other hikers, cyclists, and families enjoying the woods. It was a Sunday, and as expected, the main paths were busy with people, seeking a bit more solitude. Before I knew it, I was in the 7th grade when our science teacher, Mr. Johansson, yes, there's an extra E in that, announced that we'd be going on a field trip into the hills to study birds. We had been learning about ecosystems, and he figured it'd be better to see real animals in the wild instead of just flipping through a book. I was around 13 at the time. I liked birds fine, but I wasn't really an outdoors kind of kid. Most of my free time was spent inside on the computer or reading fantasy stories. So wandering around in thick woods wasn't exactly on my list of fun things to do. But I had never been hiking in Real Hills before, and I guess part of me was curious to try it out. When the day came, we loaded up into a yellow school bus early in the morning. It was mid-May, and the air was cool with patches of sunlight poking through the clouds, which later cleared to a bright, clear sky. The trip wasn't far, about an hour from our school, somewhere along the edge of the Ozarks in Missouri. The ride was full of the usual middle school noise and jokes. Most of us had backpacks with snacks, water, and the stuff Mr. Johansson told us to bring. A small notebook and a pencil to take notes on 10 different kinds of birds. His instructions were simple. Watch for birds, write down what they looked like, how they acted, and what they sounded like. Then we'd compare our notes with a bird guide when we got back to school. I was sitting next to my friend Caleb on the ride. He was looking through this folded guide Mr. Johansson had passed out, filled with pictures of birds common to the area. Sparrows, bluebirds, crows, flickers. My other friend Josh was behind us, leaning forward over the seat, saying he hoped we'd spot a hawk or maybe even a peregrine falcon. I was just hoping to see anything at all. I didn't want to end up writing down nothing. We arrived at a gravel lot near a forest trailhead. Mr. Johansson and a few parent helpers split us into small groups of 3. He reminded us of the 2 important rules. 1, stay on the main loop. 2, never leave your group. That second one was mostly for the class clowns, but it applied to everyone. Luckily, Caleb, Josh, and I were allowed to be in the same group. We'd been friends for years, all growing up on the same street and somehow always landing in the same classes. Mr. Johansson pointed us to the trail we were supposed to take, a wide path that wound around the base of a steep hill. He said we wouldn't be climbing anything hard. The trail was smooth and easy, just enough to get a taste of real hiking. Trees stood tall and packed tightly around the path, and you could hear the chirps and whistles of birds from all directions. For kids who usually sat inside glued to screens, it was exciting. I was surprised at how much I was actually enjoying it. It felt like a totally different place than our plain suburban street back home. We started off just strolling quietly, trying to listen for bird sounds. Now and then we'd spot a sparrow hopping through a bush or a pair of bluebirds zipping between branches. I jot things down in my little notebook. Bright blue bird with rounded wings, or small gray bird, high-pitched call, fast-moving. We didn't know the exact names, but that was part of the fun. Josh had this idea to look for the tallest tree and sit under it. His thinking was that we might see something bigger, like a hawk or even a bald eagle, if we gave ourselves a good open view of the canopy above. We wandered a little deeper into the woods and found what had to be the largest tree in the area. A giant maple with thick ridges down the bark and huge roots pushing out of the dirt. Josh pointed up and said, "That's the biggest one we've seen." Caleb nodded and said, "Maybe we'll get a good view up through the branches." I agreed. The tree was still right next to the trail, maybe a couple steps off to the side. We weren't going far. We settled down on the soft, mossy ground, leaning against the massive trunk. Light came through the leaves above in little shifting spots, like slow-moving shadows. Josh pulled out a tiny pair of binoculars his dad let him borrow. Caleb went back to flipping through the bird pamphlet, reading about sharp-shinned hawks and red-tailed ones. "Think we'll spot an eagle?" he asked, half laughing. We all knew it wasn't likely, but it was fun to think about. Josh chuckled and said, "If we do, I'm getting it on video." He wasn't supposed to have his phone, but no one stopped him. I kept my pencil ready, just in case something cool flew overhead. We started talking about random stuff, mostly video games. I tried telling them about this book series I was into, but they weren't all that interested. Still, it felt different out there. Instead of sitting in a noisy classroom, we were out in the woods. Felt like an actual adventure. Then we heard something. A sharp, strange noise came from up above. It wasn't quite a screech and not quite a chirp, almost like both mashed together. It had a raspy, rough edge to it. We stopped talking right away. Josh slowly tilted his binoculars up. "Did you guys hear that?" he whispered. We all looked up, squinting through the thick net of branches. It wasn't easy to see with all the leaves, but something stood out. High above us was a large, dark lump clinging to a branch. It didn't look like any nest I'd ever seen. It was too smooth, too even. At first, I thought it might be bark or a knot of moss, but the longer I looked, the more it didn't seem natural. Caleb spoke first. "What is that?" "Some kind of furry bird nest." Josh frowned through the binoculars. "Not a nest. It looks fuzzy. Maybe a clump of caterpillars or something. Or a raccoon," he said. I tried to see for myself, but I didn't have binoculars and it was so far up. Whatever it was perfectly still, and that was almost the weirdest part. Animals move. Birds move. This thing didn't budge. We started throwing out wild guesses. Some strange wasp nest? A squirrel burrow? Maybe an illusion caused by the way the bark was twisted? We weren't going to climb up there, obviously, and we wouldn't have dared even if we could. "Let's just watch it," Josh said. "Maybe it'll move." So we waited. We sat there for a long time, noting down a few other birds as they flew past. A pair of chickadees and a cardinal that flitted to a nearby bush. But all the while, we kept glancing up at that strange, furry lump. Even though it wasn't cold, I felt goosebumps rise on my arms. Then a big turkey vulture came gliding in, its wide wings spread out, and landed a few branches over from the dark shape. We all watched it land. It had the classic features: big wings, red bald head. Gross but fascinating. Josh whispered, "That's going on my list for sure." Caleb turned to me and started saying something about the vulture's wingspan, but then we both saw it. That lump above us moved. So fast, I almost couldn't register it. Just a blur. The black shape lunged forward and hit the vulture before it could fly away. In a blink, the creature had it. I heard this awful sound, like a squeal and a hiss mixed together. The thing that hit the bird wasn't bark or moss. It was alive, covered in thick black fur, and it had several spindly, thin limbs gripping the vulture. I saw sharp teeth, or maybe fangs, sink into the bird's side. It was chewing. Caleb let out a shout. Josh stumbled backward, nearly tripping. I must have screamed too. I could hardly process what I was seeing. The thing was enormous, like the size of a large dog, maybe bigger. A massive spider, with a round belly and thick, hairy legs wrapped around the branch. I couldn't see its eyes, but I saw the dripping fangs. It had caught the vulture and was holding it close like a toy. The vulture struggled, its wings flapping, but the spider held tight. I didn't see much blood, just a trickle. But what really got me was the wet slurping noise. I think it was sucking the inside of the bird. That was it for me. I dropped my notebook. The three of us ran like our lives depended on it. We tore down the path, legs moving as fast as they could. I could hear Caleb gasping behind me. Josh was yelling something like, "Run! Go!" We didn't stop until we nearly crashed into one of the parent helpers leading another group. We collapsed in front of them, breathing hard, crying. The adult asked what happened. We were too shaken to explain at first. Finally, Josh managed to say something like, "A spider. It ate a bird." Everyone looked at us like we'd lost it. The adult's eyes widened a bit. Then she tried to calm us down, but I could see it in her face. She wasn't sure what to believe either. I grew up just a few miles from the boundary of Larton Creek Park in Ohio. Being out there in the open air always helped me clear my thoughts. I've heard people say similar things before, but I really mean it. I don't scare easily. I'm a down-to-earth person, and I understand how nature works, so I'm aware of what's out there. But something happened on one particular fall hike that shook me up. The sky was pale that day, which made the fall colors really stand out. That's why I figured it was the perfect day for a hike. Bright reds and deep oranges lined the trail that led toward the falls. I brought my dog, Baxter, along for company. Baxter's an 8-year-old mixed breed I adopted when he was just a pup. He's usually very calm, doesn't even flinch at chipmunks or birds. He walks along like he owns the path. I always say he's the best hiking partner I could have. He keeps up, rarely pulls on the leash, and listens pretty well. We started out in the early afternoon. I remember the air had that scent of damp leaves mixed with a hint of soil. The kind of clean, earthy smell that always reminds me fall is truly here. The trail through Larton Falls was in great shape that day. Even though it had rained earlier that week, the path wasn't muddy. I could hear the distant rush of water even before we reached the trailhead, and I was looking forward to seeing the falls running heavier than usual. It was just cool enough that I wore a light jacket, but not so cold I'd be freezing if I stopped walking. The trail began wide, trees on both sides shedding their leaves. Some were nearly bare already, others still holding onto their color. Baxter walked right beside me, sniffing at leaves here and there or checking out tree trunks as we passed. We were making good time, so I figured we'd take a little side route to a rocky viewpoint I had visited once before. It's not part of the official trail, just a short detour to a big slab of rock that lets you see the falls from a different angle, higher up than the main overlook. By the time we got to that spot, I could hear the water clearly. The view was beautiful. Baxter panted lightly beside me while I just stood there taking it all in. The spot was peaceful. No one else was around, and the sound of water made this constant white noise that made me want to doze off. After a while, we moved on, looking for a place to sit and have a snack. The path narrowed as we got closer to the falls and passed through a rocky section that led right along the edge of the water. Around that point, Baxter did something he had never done before. He growled. It wasn't loud, but it was low and serious, and it stopped me immediately. Baxter's not the type to growl at shadows. I looked at him and saw that he was tense, body stiff, eyes locked onto something near a patch of ferns and mossy rocks down below the waterfall. I assumed he spotted a deer or something hiding. I knelt down beside him, rubbed his back, and looked in the same direction, trying to spot whatever had caught his attention. But nothing was moving. No animals took off, and the ferns weren't swaying. The only thing shifting was the mist that occasionally blew through the air. I asked, "What's going on, boy?" under my breath. He let out a small whimper that was more of a vibration than a sound. His ears were pinned flat, and he edged forward slowly, like he was ready to spring if he needed to. That's when I noticed something just at the edge of the falls. It was standing just outside our direct view, in a bend where the water flowed around a cluster of rocks. At first, I couldn't make sense of the shape. It looked like a tall shadow hidden by the mist, kind of human-sized, but it didn't match the outline of a person. I couldn't see any detail, just this tall, unmoving form. Maybe it was a log or a strange rock formation, I thought. But the more I stared, the more I noticed that it wasn't completely still. It shifted just barely, like it was aware we were watching. The hair on the back of my neck stood straight up. I've seen plenty of wild animals in the woods. Foxes, raccoons, coyotes, but none of them ever gave me the same nervous feeling this did. This was something else. Baxter clearly felt it too. His body was locked in place, but his eyes were wide. He was trying to tell me, "We need to leave." He growled again, this time louder, and took a step back, brushing against my leg. I called out, "Hey, you all right over there?" hoping maybe someone in hiking gear would step into view. But there was no answer. The figure didn't react. It didn't wave. It didn't turn. It didn't move at all. It just stood there, like it was watching. I crept forward carefully, the wet leaves and smooth stones making the footing slippery. I had to be careful not to fall. Baxter barked sharply behind me, which startled me, but I kept going. I moved maybe 8 or 9 feet closer. Now I could see more clearly how the mist curled around that shape. It was definitely person-shaped, but it looked like it was wearing something dark, or it was dark itself. Could have been skin or fur. I couldn't tell. What I do know is that it stood right on a narrow ledge above the water, far too close to the edge for comfort. No normal person would stand there so still, without holding out their arms to balance or trying not to fall. Then, all of a sudden, it turned. Just a quick movement, like it was glancing back at us. But I didn't see a face. The motion was smooth, almost unnatural, and it seemed to register me in that second. Before I could process what I was seeing, it disappeared, just faded backward into the mist, like it had stepped behind a veil of water. I can't explain it better than that. One moment it was there, and the next it was gone. Baxter whimpered and pressed against my leg. There was tension in the air, like the woods had suddenly gone silent. I took a few steps closer to the edge, even though everything in my gut was screaming at me to leave. I looked through the haze, hoping I wouldn't suddenly see a face appear out of nowhere and scare me half to death. But all I saw was the waterfall, crashing down onto the rocks below. I called out again. "Anyone out there?" That's when I noticed something strange in the pool just to the side. It wasn't big, just a calm pocket of water where the main stream passed by. And right there I saw 2 small, glowing points. They looked like eyes, shiny like how animal eyes reflect light at night. Only it wasn't night. There wasn't any reason for a reflection like that during the day. I'm not the kind of guy who jumps to wild ideas, but the way those lights blinked out the moment I blinked made me feel something was definitely off. Baxter started pawing at me, trying to pull me back. I finally listened. My instincts told me we weren't going to get any answers if we stayed. I gave the area one last look, my heart still pounding but slowing down. Then we turned around. Baxter practically dragged me up the path, his tail tucked partway under. I kept glancing behind us, half expecting to see someone, or something, following, but the woods stayed quiet. We didn't see another person until we reached the road again. That's where a couple was unloading their car, getting ready for a walk. Baxter perked up immediately. He's always liked people. That's when I realized how tense my whole body had been. I thought about warning them, but what would I even say? "Hey, I saw something standing by the falls, and then it vanished?" They'd probably look at me like I'd lost it. So I just gave them a nod and walked back to my truck. I've been back to that trail several times since then, and I've never had that same experience again. I don't know what I saw that day. You can offer whatever explanation you want, but I'm still convinced it was real. It was alive. Maybe a person, maybe something else. I'll never know for sure. But if you ever find yourself near the falls at Larton Creek, keep an eye out, because I swear, something's watching out there. Dirt Face from Claremont. There's a stillness in the Montana backcountry that feels like stepping out of time. No engines, no talking, no buzzing of phones. Just trees in every direction, standing tall and gently swaying with the wind. This was what I needed. A break, a way to reset my mind. I left my car parked by the trail entrance, threw my pack over my shoulders, and tightened the straps on my boots. The morning air had a bite to it, nipping at my cheeks and waking up my senses. I pulled out my map, gave it a quick look, folded it up, and tucked it back into my pocket before heading out. My boots crunched against the packed dirt, each step sounding louder in the hush that surrounded me. It was quiet in a way that felt different than any other hike I'd been on. No far-off voices, no barking dogs, no trail signs at every turn. Just raw, untouched forest. I soaked in the solitude. It was the kind of freedom I couldn't find back in town, where everything buzzed and blinked and demanded your time. The first few miles passed without anything unusual. A squirrel darted across the trail, and a lone bird circled slowly above the tree line. I paused once to shift the weight of my pack and take a drink of water, letting the quiet settle deep inside me. Then I saw something just past the tree line to my right. At first, I figured it was just the light playing tricks through the leaves. Sunlight can make shadows look like all sorts of strange things. But as I squinted, I realized it wasn't a trick. It was a man, just standing there, not moving. Something about him wasn't right. He looked oddly stretched, like his limbs were a little too long for his body. He was facing me, or I think he was. It was hard to tell. His face looked smooth, like there were no features. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just blank skin. I froze, trying to think of a logical reason for what I was seeing. Maybe it was a mask. Maybe he was a hunter wearing some kind of gear. But who just stands completely still? Who doesn't blink? I shouted something, just a quick greeting. My voice sounded too loud, echoing in the silence. He didn't react. He didn't shift or look away. He just stood there. My heart was thudding as I took a step back. My hands clutched the straps of my pack. I blinked, and he was gone. Not like he turned and walked away. Just gone. Like he'd never been there. I stared at the spot, waiting for my brain to explain it. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I just imagined the shape. Maybe all the trees were messing with my perception. I shook it off and kept walking, but my steps felt heavier now, and the forest didn't seem so welcoming anymore. It was quieter, darker. When it came time to stop for the night, I set up camp a little off the main trail, farther from that spot, just to be safe. I pitched the tent as the sky faded from blue to deep orange and purple. Dinner was quick. A freeze-dried pouch of something bland that filled my stomach, though it barely tasted like food. I was worn out, and the first stars had already appeared when I crawled into the tent and zipped it tight. At night, the woods change. The silence becomes almost too much. You hear every tiny sound. Leaves brushing together, a stick snapping in the distance, the creak of a branch. I lay still, listening to my breathing and trying to tell myself I was okay. I was alone, nothing to worry about. Eventually, I drifted off. I don't know how long I slept, but when I opened my eyes, the first thing I noticed was how cold it had gotten. Freezing air blew against my face, and I felt something was wrong. The tent flap was open, not slightly, not halfway, wide open, hanging loose, swaying in the wind. I sat up fast, heart racing. My first thought was, did I forget to close it? Had I heard something before and ignored it? I reached for my flashlight and pointed it out into the dark. The beam lit up nothing but trees. I waited there, flashlight in one hand, knife in the other, my body tense and shivering. I told myself I must have been too tired to zip it all the way. That had to be it. I closed it again, this time checking the zipper over and over. Still, it took me hours to calm down, and even then, I didn't sleep much. Every sound outside made my nerves jolt. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, but I had no idea how much worse it would get. When morning came, I tried to tell myself the whole tent thing was just me being forgetful, but the feeling stuck. Something felt different about the woods, heavier, like the forest was holding its breath. I packed up quickly, trying not to look over my shoulder too often. The sky was cloudy, and the sun came through in short flashes, casting weird shadows that moved across the path. I kept walking, boots crunching beneath me, trying to push the weirdness out of my mind. Then I saw it. A bundle of sticks tied up with string, placed directly in the middle of the trail. It wasn't big, maybe the size of my arm, but it had been arranged carefully. The sticks were bent and twisted to form a shape that looked like a small person. I stared at it. My chest tightened. Someone had made it. Recently, too. It hadn't been there yesterday. I nudged it with my foot, thinking it would fall apart, but it didn't. The string was tight. Probably just a joke. I told myself out loud, my voice thin and shaky, but who was out here playing games? And why? I kicked it off the trail and kept walking. The cold seemed sharper now. The peaceful quiet of the woods had turned into something uncomfortable. Every noise made me flinch. Every crack of twigs made me stop and look around. By the time the sun was dipping again, I couldn't take the unease anymore. I picked a new place to camp, even farther from the path. A tight clearing surrounded by dense trees. I set up fast, hands shaking a little as I worked. As night fell, I lit a small fire and hoped it would calm me down. But every pop of burning would make me jump, and the shadows the flames cast felt strange, like they moved when I wasn't looking. I forced down a bit of food, but I wasn't hungry. My eyes kept flicking to the trees, where I thought I saw something move. Just beyond the firelight, a shadow darted between trunks. I held my breath, my eyes locked on the spot. Nothing. I whispered a shaky hello, but got nothing back, just the wind. I grabbed my flashlight again and swept it across the woods. Tree trunks, leaves, nothing else. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. I put out the fire, hurried into my tent, and zipped it up tight. I checked every seam, every corner. My knife sat next to me, the grip slick in my sweaty hands. I lay there waiting, and then I saw them. Two small, glowing dots in the trees, just above eye level, like eyes. They didn't blink, didn't sway with the branches, just stared. I tried to convince myself they were reflections, maybe an animal, but they were too steady, too direct. I didn't move. I barely breathed. My grip tightened on the knife, my body frozen in place. Minutes dragged, then an hour, maybe more. The eyes stayed. Only when the first light of morning started to reach the tent did they vanish. I didn't move until sunlight was fully covering the clearing. Then I unzipped the tent slowly and stepped out. There it was, lying right in front of my tent door, an X made of twigs and twine. It was clean, precise, like someone had left it there deliberately, like a sign. I stared at it, stomach turning. Something had come to my camp while I lay inside, too afraid to even speak. This wasn't a trick. This wasn't in my head. I didn't eat. I packed up fast and hit the trail. My legs were sore from the tension, my eyes scanning every tree, every shadow. My knife stayed in my hand the whole way. Whatever peace I'd come out here for was gone. The woods felt like they were pressing in on me, trying to keep me there. Every step felt like it cost more energy. I could barely feel the weight of my pack anymore. All I wanted was to reach the trailhead, to be back in my car. I hadn't seen another person the entire trip. No hikers, no animals, nothing. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it like static under my skin. Time didn't feel right. I had no idea how long I'd been walking. Then I heard it, the soft crunch of leaves behind me. I froze. My heartbeat roared in my ears. I turned slowly, looked down the trail. Nothing, just trees and brush. I waited, ears straining. Nothing. I shook it off and kept going, my focus locked on the dirt ahead. I could see the lot now, my car barely visible through the trees. Then a small stone landed on the path behind me. I turned sharply. Still nothing. Another rock. Closer. Then another. This wasn't random. It felt like something was trying to push me forward, make me move. The path opened a little, and I saw the edge of the lot. Relief hit me like a wave. I ran. My legs screamed, but I didn't care. I ran until I hit the gravel. I didn't stop until I reached my car door. I didn't look back. I got in, started the engine. This time, I'll admit right away, I didn't organize this trip very well. My plan was pretty basic. Get away from everything, spend a weekend outdoors, and clear my mind. The woods near Blue Ridge, Pennsylvania seemed like a good choice. I didn't even bother reserving a place to stay. I just packed my stuff in the back of my old Jeep and started driving. By the time I reached the start of the trail, it was nearly 6 p.m., way later than I expected. The parking area was empty, not a single car anywhere. A wooden sign said the nearest cabin was a 6-hour walk away. 6 hours? I thought if I kept up a good pace, maybe I could reach it by midnight or so. I had a flashlight and plenty of adrenaline, so I wasn't too worried. Still, something about the empty lot made my skin crawl. The first part of the trail was okay. The air was cool and smelled like pine and earth. The tall trees towered above me, their branches weaving tightly overhead. I kept a steady pace, the sound of my boots crunching on dry leaves breaking the silence. But thinking back, it was too quiet. No birds chirping, no leaves moving in the wind, just me. After about 2 hours, the sun slipped beneath the trees and everything turned a dull gray. I paused for a break, leaning against a moss-covered rock to catch my breath and drink some water. Then I heard something, a soft snap, like a footstep nearby. My stomach twisted and I froze, water bottle halfway to my mouth. I listened hard, but all I heard was the buzz of insects and the faint sound of leaves stirring. Probably just a deer, I told myself, maybe some small animal. But when I swung my flashlight beam through the trees, it cut through the darkness like a knife and showed nothing. Get a grip, I whispered to myself, trying to shake off the tension. It was probably my imagination. I pushed off the rock and quickened my steps as the trail grew darker. By the 3rd hour, it was completely dark. My flashlight was the only thing giving me any light, but its narrow beam barely reached far. The trees had grown thicker, their twisted trunks black and gnarled in the shadows. Every few minutes, I thought I heard something. A faint rustle behind me, a twig snapping. But whenever I stopped and shined my light around, there was nothing there. The loneliness was crushing. I kept telling myself it was just the woods playing tricks on me, my mind making sounds out of silence. But the feeling that someone or something was watching never left me. It was like a crawling itch at the back of my neck. Then, about 4 hours in, I heard it again. This time, it wasn't soft. A branch snapped loudly, deliberately, somewhere to my left. My heart jumped and I spun around, flashlight shaking in my hand. The light landed on a group of trees, their shadows stretching out like bony fingers. "Hello," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. The forest didn't answer. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move, something darting behind a tree. I shouted instinctively, my voice cracking. The forest swallowed the sound. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out everything else. I held the flashlight steady, shining it on the spot where I'd seen movement. But nothing appeared. No shape, no eyes, no figure. I backed away slowly, my footsteps crunching on the dirt trail. The flashlight beam swung wildly as I moved, but the shadows were too thick, too dark. My breath came fast and shallow, the kind that tries to calm itself but fails. Then it happened, a scream, high-pitched, warped, and impossibly loud. It ripped through the forest like a blade, echoing in every direction. I froze, every muscle stiffening. It didn't sound human. It didn't sound like any animal I knew. It was wrong. I don't remember deciding to run. One moment I was frozen. The next I was sprinting, legs burning as I tore down the path. The flashlight bounced wildly in my hand, lighting up roots and rocks that I barely avoided. Behind me, I heard heavy footsteps, fast and deliberate. Something was chasing me. I didn't dare look back. The trail blurred as I ran, my lungs screaming for air, my mind flooded with questions I didn't want answered. What was out there? What did it want? The footsteps stopped suddenly, but I didn't. I kept running, desperate to put as much space between me and whatever was following. When I couldn't run anymore, I stumbled off the path, collapsing behind a huge fallen tree. My chest heaved and my throat burned from gasping cold air. I shut off the flashlight and crouched low, clutching it like a weapon. The darkness was complete. My hands trembled, my ears straining for any sound. I waited, and then I heard it again. Soft, purposeful footsteps circling the tree I was hiding behind. I clenched my jaw, holding my breath. The footsteps stopped just on the other side. Something heavy scraped the bark. I closed my eyes and prayed it couldn't see me, couldn't hear my pounding heart. Then silence, only the faint buzz of insects. I stayed there for what felt like hours, too scared to move. Whatever it was out there was waiting, watching. I knew this wasn't over. I don't know how long I stayed crouched under that tree, every second stretching into forever. My muscles ached, breath shallow and uneven. My flashlight sat cold and dark in my shaking hands. I couldn't bring myself to turn it back on. Not yet. If I did, whatever was out there would see me first. The footsteps had stopped, but the forest wasn't quiet. Far away, crickets chirped steadily, their hum oddly comforting. Closer, I heard sharper sounds, small twig snaps, leaves rustling, sometimes near, sometimes farther away. Whatever it was, it hadn't left. It was circling me. I thought about running, but where would I go? The trail was nearly invisible even with my flashlight, and I had no idea how far I'd wandered. Then I heard the scream again. The memory froze me solid. I didn't want to hear it again. I didn't want to find out what made it. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time seemed swallowed by the forest. My mind raced with worst-case thoughts. What if it was leading me somewhere? What if there were more than one? What if it didn't even need to see me to know where I was? Then, from the silence, came a whisper, low, guttural, barely audible. My heart stopped. I couldn't make out words, if they were words at all. But the sound was clearly human. It rose and fell like someone muttering to themselves, each syllable jagged and harsh, like it hurt to say. The whisper came again, closer this time. My breath hitched and I pressed myself tighter against the tree trunk. I couldn't see anything in the darkness, but I could feel it. Something was just on the other side. I fumbled for my flashlight. Every instinct screamed not to turn it on, but I couldn't just sit there in the dark. My fingers found the switch, slick with sweat. I took a deep breath, counted to 3, and flicked it on. The beam cut through the blackness. For a brief second, I wished I hadn't. The light shone on a figure crouched maybe 12 feet away. Its face was hidden under a hood or long hair. I couldn't tell. Its body was twisted at an unnatural angle, one arm bracing the ground, the other reaching out toward me. When the light hit its face, it pulled back with a low hiss. Its movements were jerky, like a puppet on strings. Before I could even process what I was seeing, it scrambled back into the shadows, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was caving in. The flashlight shook in my hands, the beam darting wildly. But there was nothing, no sign of it, just the endless, suffocating darkness. I had to move. Staying still wasn't an option anymore. Whatever it was, it knew where I was. Slowly, I stood, legs trembling so badly I nearly fell. I scanned the area one last time, then started walking, trying to keep my steps as quiet as possible. A thick fog had rolled in while I was hiding, covering the forest in a heavy, choking gray. My flashlight barely cut through it. Every tree looked the same, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The trail was gone. I had no idea where I was. I stumbled through bushes and underbrush, each step crunching louder than I wanted. The whispers followed me, sometimes louder, sometimes fading, weaving in and out of the fog. Every so often I heard a footstep or the faint scrape of something dragging along the ground. I was too scared to look back. Then I found it, a clearing. First, I thought it was the cabin, but as I got closer, my stomach sank. In the center was a ring of branches arranged in a perfect circle. Strange symbols were carved into each one, crude and uneven, as if made by a shaky hand. In the middle of the circle was a hole, deep, fresh, wide enough to fit a person. I stumbled back, flashlight catching something else. Footprints. Human footprints, big and uneven, leading from the hole to the tree line. Just so you know, my dad is never the most punctual guy. He's a great person, but always has some kind of reason for running late. He usually tries to joke about it, but gets a bit defensive if you don't laugh at his excuses. I can't recall what his reason was this time, but he pulled up to my apartment complex close to 10 a.m., honking his horn repeatedly, pretending it was my fault for holding things up. I was furious. There's nothing that makes me more annoyed than someone honking their horn like a fool instead of just coming to knock on the door. During the whole trip to meet Sam and Dave, I barely said a word to Dad because I was so mad. He just acted silly to try to lighten the mood after being late. Without a single call beforehand, we stopped at a couple of rest areas for snacks, and every time we got back in the car, Dad started smoking, knowing full well I hated that he smoked while driving. But Dad does what he wants, no matter what anyone thinks. By around noon, when we were supposed to be meeting Sam and Dave, they started texting me. I told them Dad was super late picking me up, so we'd probably arrive around 5 or 6 p.m. They were mad, too. The sky was turning orange as we finally reached the parking area where we'd leave our cars. This part of the trail had an optional loop we planned to take so we could return to the cars after the hike. As soon as we got out of the car, a cold, misty rain began. It wasn't heavy but still annoying since we should have already been at the campsite by then. Sam and Dave were teasing Dad so much that he took even longer to pack his gear. By the time we started hiking, it was already dark enough that we had to use the headlamps we'd brought just to see through the thick leaves above us. If you don't know, flashlights and headlamps don't help much when you're in a pitch-dark forest. They might let you see about 15 or 20 feet ahead at best. Add to that the rain, which got heavier after about an hour, and we could only see about 5 to 10 feet in front of us. We were all miserable, soaked, and cold. To try to keep our spirits up and keep any bears away, Sam suggested we start singing. We sang a bunch of old songs, I don't even remember which ones, and none of us had good voices, so it was a pretty awful sound. At one point, Sam tripped while crossing a creek in the dark and smashed a watch he'd gotten at some company event. It broke into a bunch of pieces. By then, we were just trying to find a place to set up our hammocks for the night and get some rest. But since we had all our food with us, we had to reach one of the trail spots with ropes to hang our supplies safely out of reach of bears. So we kept moving until we got there. Finally, in almost complete darkness and with the rain lightening to a drizzle, we made it. I lost track of time, but it must have been around midnight or 1 in the morning. We pulled out our hammocks and rain covers and hoisted our packs on the ropes, if that's the right term for those ropes, which shows you how little experience I had with hiking like this. None of us except Sam had ever done this kind of trip before. We set up on a small slope with several trees where we could hang our hammocks in a line. It was a small clearing and far enough from the trail. Let me tell you, if you've never tried sleeping in a hammock on a hill, don't. But it was all we had that night. After settling in and saying goodnight, I was just dozing off when I suddenly felt like someone was watching me. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my nerves since I wasn't used to being in the woods like that. Everyone else was asleep, and the usual animal sounds were around, so I thought it was fine and tried to fall back asleep. Just as I closed my eyes, I heard a strange female voice whisper in my ear, saying, "Come with me." The voice was weird, almost like it wasn't quite real. It said my name, too, and it sounded like someone was right next to me whispering a secret, but I felt no breath on my ear. I immediately turned on my headlamp, which I had on while sleeping, and looked around. There was no one there. The forest sounds stopped, too. I didn't get out of my hammock. Not because I thought it would keep me safe, but I didn't want to move. I drew my knife and held it across my chest for a while. The voice came back several more times, but each time there was nothing to see. It seemed to come from nowhere, whispering directly into my ear. I didn't hear any footsteps crunching on the fallen leaves or rustling in the bushes or branches. Just that voice calling me, asking me to come with it. Every time I heard it, all the hairs on my body stood up. I was wide awake and couldn't fall back asleep until the forest sounds returned. I'm aware that strange things are real in the world, and one of the few things I can think of that might explain it is some kind of fae or nature spirit. But my family is very skeptical about anything paranormal that isn't in the Bible. After packing up and starting the hike the next morning, I asked Sam to hang back for a minute. He looked pale but didn't say anything about hearing the voice. The worst part was we still had 2 more nights on the trail. Thankfully, on day 2, we started much earlier, again not thanks to Dad, and found a spot where we could arrange our hammocks in a circle. The voice didn't come back that night or the next, and after a tough hike, we finally made it back to the cars. This is one of the strangest overnight hiking trips I've ever had, and as long as I have any say, it'll be the last. The northeastern region of the United States has a deep history. Not many people talk about it, but locals understand that the forests here can sometimes feel unfriendly. If anyone has any ideas about what I'm about to share, I would be grateful. This happened about a decade ago on a bright afternoon. I was walking my dog along a quiet country lane close to my home, a path we had taken many times before. Suddenly, I heard a strange bird sound coming from just inside the trees. As I kept walking down the road, I kept hearing the bird call again and again, always seeming just out of my view. This annoyed me because I'd never heard a bird like this before, and I wanted to see it clearly to figure out what it was. No matter how closely I searched the trees and bushes, I never saw any sign of movement. Even when the calls seemed to shift to a different spot, I couldn't spot the bird. When I reached the small wooden bridge over a creek, I turned back to head home. There were no real homes on this stretch, just the remains of an old sawmill from around 2 centuries ago and a rundown cabin so old it had a separate toilet building. I could still hear that bird, and it called out with a steady, almost maddening rhythm. At one point, I got so annoyed I stepped off the road to try and find the bird. Every time I took a few steps closer, the sound seemed to move deeper into the forest. How was I not seeing any sign of this creature moving around? Suddenly, the world seemed to snap back to normal, like I had been in a daze or trance. I was now about 25 or 30 feet into the woods, and everything had gone strangely quiet. Why was I even doing this? The only sound was that weird bird call. How could a bird cover maybe 15 feet in seconds without me catching a glimpse? My will to find the bird was replaced by a sick feeling of fear. My mind was screaming at me for being foolish. I turned and walked back to the road as calmly as I could, then continued home. The bird calls followed me until I was well away from that old place. I tried walking my dog down that road a few more times, but every time I heard those calls, I got a creepy feeling, like something inside me was twisting and laughing at me. Sounds strange, but it really felt like that. My dog never seemed bothered, so maybe it was just in my mind. Enough time has passed now that although I can't describe the bird's call, something tells me I would recognize it immediately. I spent hours listening to random bird sounds online, but never found a match. Back around 2014, my close buddy and I went hiking in the woods on one of the local hills late in the afternoon for some exercise, and because we were pretty bored. Not much happened on the way up, just a few wallabies here and there, but nothing else. The view at the top was beautiful, a great spot to relax for a while. After the sun went down, we grabbed our headlamps and flashlights and carefully started our way down the hill back toward the town. Again, not much happened on the way down, except for some strange noises and some lively rustling from local animals. About 3/4 of the way down, we stopped to take a break, which was unusual because we weren't that tired going up, and we had rested enough at the top. But now, we both felt really drained, even though our backpacks were lighter after using some supplies. Felt a bit strange. Then we noticed something: complete silence all around. No nightlife sounds, no crickets, nothing. Even the leaves weren't moving or making noise like before. It was totally quiet. Naturally, this creeped us out, so we decided to pick up the pace quietly. By the time we reached the bottom, it was like all the sounds suddenly came back on again. We kept walking, feeling normal again, chatting about random stuff and stepping aside for the occasional car. Then, a kilometer or two later, we heard something weird again, and all the other noises stopped once more. When I started feeling tired, my adrenaline kicked in because I remembered this had happened before. Then came that noise again, some kind of rough, deep growl from far away. It came from the woods on the right side of the path. I don't know what it was, but I do know no person can make that sound. As we got closer, we heard a lot of crashing noises from the same area, then that awful noise again, and the sound of an animal in pain that suddenly stopped. From the first time we heard it until then, we had turned off our lights and were creeping along quietly. But now, curiosity got the better of us. We shone our flashlights toward where the sounds were coming from. What we saw next almost made me lose it completely. If my friend hadn't been there, I would have run straight back to town. But even though we tried to act brave, all we could do was pull out our knives and stare, not understanding what we were looking at. This creature was staring right back at us. To make things worse, it had a nearly full-grown wallaby in its jaws, or what was left of it, since it looked like it was gutted alive and was still twitching. Every part of me wanted to run like crazy back to town, But thankfully, I managed to stay still and not make any sudden moves. Somehow, I knew if we ran, we wouldn't get very far. For what felt like forever, it just watched us, like it was deciding whether to drop its fresh prey or come after us instead. Then, it hunched over and made a muffled version of that horrible sound again. It backed away a bit, then jumped about 5 meters up the cliff behind it. It made that noise one more time before climbing higher up the cliff and disappearing from sight. It was big, covered in grayish-white fur, and could stand on 2 legs when it wanted to. It had strange-shaped but strong jaws and claws that looked like hands. The worst thing was its eyes. I swear, those eyes looked full of nothing but hunger and anger. Needless to say, I don't go hiking at night anymore. Werewolf sighting from Mad Miller. The Northwest had always pulled me in. Its thick woods and foggy hills felt more like home than my small apartment back east. This trip was meant to be my getaway. A fresh start after years of struggling through work and everyday life. It began just right. The cool mountain air, winding roads that seemed to go on forever, and a quiet that let my mind clear up for the first time in months. When Jake joined me in Ashland, things changed. He stepped off the bus looking pale, like he hadn't slept in days. I figured it was just the long trip or his usual grumbling about being out in the woods. But there was something else. A nervousness I couldn't quite figure out. "This place is strange," he muttered as we loaded his pack into the car. He kept glancing around like someone might be watching, even though the parking lot was empty except for an old truck. "Yeah, strangely beautiful," I joked, trying to lighten the mood. "You'll love it once we get out there." He didn't say much on the drive to the cabin. Jake stared out the window like the trees were closing in on us. Honestly, the forest did feel thicker than normal, almost alive. I told myself it was just the cloudy sky or the early evening, but by the time we got there, I was feeling uneasy too. The cabin wasn't much. An old wooden building that smelled faintly sour, with creaky floors and a roof that looked like it had weathered too many storms. "Charming," I said, trying to sound upbeat as I opened the door. "Charming is code for haunted," Jake said, tossing his bag on the couch. He didn't sound joking, and the look he gave me made my stomach twist. Inside, the cabin was even smaller than the pictures showed. A single light bulb buzzed faintly in the living room. The kitchen was barely more than a counter with a rusty old stove and a tiny sink. The windows were small, and when I peeked outside, all I could see was forest. An endless wall of dark green stretching every way. We unpacked without talking. Jake kept checking his phone even though we both knew there wouldn't be signal out here. He had a habit of pacing when he felt nervous, and by the time I'd set my bag down, he'd already worn a path in the thin carpet. "What's wrong?" I finally asked, trying to sound casual. "Nothing," he said too quickly. "It's just, this place feels off." "Off how?" Pressed. He shrugged. "I don't know, like we're being watched or something." I rolled my eyes, but his words hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't admitted it yet, but the cabin felt strange. The air was heavy, almost hard to breathe, and the silence wasn't peaceful. It was like the woods were tense, holding their breath. That night, we sat by the fireplace eating Ken's stew. I'd planned a whole day of hiking and scenic drives for tomorrow, but Jake barely looked at me as I told him. He just stared into the flames, his jaw tight. "Maybe we should leave tomorrow," he said suddenly. "What? No, we just got here." I laughed, but it sounded forced. "Come on, it's not so bad. You'll feel better after some sleep." He didn't argue, which was unlike him. Jake was usually stubborn, even about small things. But tonight he just nodded, staring into the fire like he was scared to blink. Getting ready for bed, he broke the quiet again. "Hey, what was that thing you mentioned earlier? The legend or whatever?" I froze. "You mean the Forest Watchers?" "Yeah, what's that about?" "It's just a local tale," I said quickly. "People say the woods are protected. You're not supposed to disrespect the land or draw attention to yourself." He raised an eyebrow. "Draw attention? Like there's a name you can't say. They say if you do, they'll notice you." Jake smirked, and I knew what he was about to do. "No," I started, but it was too late. He said the name out loud, clear and almost like he was daring the room itself. The air felt colder right away, like a sudden breeze swept through, but the windows were shut tight. "Jake," I snapped, voice sharper than I meant. "That's not funny." "Oh, come on. It's just a story." But his smirk was gone. He glanced at the window, his shoulders stiff. The rest of the night passed in tense silence. I fell asleep easily, worn out from the day, but Jake stayed up. I woke around midnight to the sound of him pacing again. When I asked if he was okay, he just mumbled, "Go back to sleep." I did, but not before seeing how often he glanced at the windows, his face pale in the faint light. When Jake shook me awake, I thought it was time to leave for our hike. My mind was foggy, half in a dream, but his voice cut through like a sharp knife. "Get up," he hissed, trembling. "We have to go." "What time is it?" I mumbled, reaching for my phone. His hand grabbed mine, stopping me. "No, now, get up," he said, voice urgent. Took me a moment to focus on his face in the dim light. His eyes were wide, jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. Jake was tough, sarcastic, sometimes annoyingly doubtful, but never scared. Yet here he was, pale and shaking like he'd seen something no one should. "Jake," I whispered, throat dry. "What's happening?" "I can't explain it here. Just pack. We're leaving." I started to argue, but his expression stopped me. My heart raced and a cold knot formed in my belly. He grabbed his bag from the corner, throwing clothes in without care, glancing over his shoulder like someone, or something, could burst through the door any second. I pulled on a hoodie and began packing. "Was it an animal? Did you hear something outside?" Jake froze mid-step, his back to me. "Yes," he whispered, barely audible. "But it wasn't normal." My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "Not now." His voice cracked. "Just move faster." We packed quickly, then headed out to the car. The cold hit me sharp and biting, even though it hadn't been that cold before. My breath came out in puffs as I shoved my bag in the trunk. Jake was already behind the wheel, fumbling with the keys. His hands shook so much it took 3 tries to start the car. When the engine finally roared, I felt a flicker of relief. The headlights cast a weak yellow light over the dirt road, but beyond that was nothing, just pitch black. The kind of darkness you don't know exists until you're deep in nowhere. "What happened back there?" I asked, voice thin and shaky. Jake didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes on the road, knuckles white around the steering wheel. After a long pause, he exhaled sharply. "I was trying to sleep," he said, voice low and uneven. But I kept hearing this tapping sound. At first I thought it was wind or something, but it moved, from the window to the wall to the door. I shivered, pulling my hoodie tighter. Could it have been an animal? He shook his head, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. "No, too deliberate." Then he added in a whisper, and I heard whispers. I froze. "Whispers?" I repeated. "Yeah," he said barely above a breath. At first faint, like the wind through the trees, but then louder, like they were circling the cabin. Then footsteps. My chest tightened. "Footsteps." Jake nodded, jaw tight. "Heavy ones. Outside at first, moving around the porch. Then climbing. I heard them on the roof." The car swerved slightly as Jake gripped the wheel tighter. I grabbed the door handle, heart pounding in my ears. "You didn't see anything?" "No," he admitted. "But I felt it, like they were right there, watching us, waiting." A chill ran up my spine, but I forced myself calm. "Probably just animals," I said, though my words felt empty. "Raccoons or something?" Jake laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "Raccoons don't whisper." The road stretched ahead, winding through the endless forest. The farther we went, the darker it got, like the trees were swallowing up the light. The engine's hum was the only noise, but it didn't feel peaceful. It felt like we were being hunted. After about half an hour, Jake tensed. "Do you see that?" he asked sharply. I squinted into the dark. At first I saw nothing, but then 2 headlights appeared in the rearview mirror, growing brighter and closer. "Someone's behind us," I said quietly. "They weren't there a second ago," Jake said, voice tight. I watched as the car behind us sped up, closing the gap too fast. I braced myself as Jake pushed the gas pedal, tires skidding on loose gravel. The headlights loomed closer. At one point I thought they'd ram us. Then, just as suddenly as they'd come, the lights disappeared. What the hell? I whispered, twisting to look behind us. The road was empty. Jake didn't say anything. His grip on the wheel was like iron, knuckles pale in the dashboard's dim light. It's not over, he muttered. The road curved sharply.